His new acquaintance remarked he never suspected he had mastered ancient martial arts. He was curious if the guy could assess his strength with just a glance. Ning sizing up the dude sitting across from him, but something much more amusing caught his attention. There were tons of gorgeous girls on the dance floor, and a brazen stranger had set his sights on Chinhi specifically. He persistently asked her to dance, but the girl, trying to be polite, smiled sweetly and turned him down. This guy clearly wasn't used to being rebuffed after all. A simple no didn't deter him. It only fueled his determination. Now he was offering Chinhi a drink instead. She refused, but her friend didn't mind having a drink with the handsome rogue, so she expressed her interest, which made Chinhi furious. A grin spread across the guy's face as he offered his drink to his new acquaintance. She snatched the glass like it was a prize at a carnival, but when it came to Chinhi, she hesitated. Choosing to trust this sketchy character was like deciding whether to jump into a pool of sharks. Taking a deep breath, she decided to chill, so she reached out to grab whatever was being offered. But hold your horses! Her fiancé swooped in like a superhero, snatching up both girls with a look that could curdle milk directed at their new buddy. Naturally, the ladies were fuming, thinking this was a blatant case of too much testosterone. They believed that nobody had the right to dictate their decisions. Meanwhile, the guys were scratching their heads, confused about why he suddenly turned into Mr. Tough Guy. Xiao Yun was brave enough to ask what was up. Ning Bay simply tossed him the glasses and told him to figure it out himself. Suddenly, things got a bit too rowdy. Xiao Yun asked what was going on with these antics. In reply, Ning Bay just handed him a glass and told him to check out what was in it himself. Without letting Xiao Yun even begin his investigation, our hero slapped that eager blonde guy hard enough to send him a message straight to the moon. Meanwhile, Yusun's twin had a revelation that made his jaw drop. The drinks had been spiked with some no-good stuff that could put the girls in a world of trouble. A buddy leaned in, saying that the blonde must be looking for a one-way ticket to a world of hurt if he thought the contents of those glasses had been jazzed up with something forbidden, something that could give the girls quite the kick. A buddy who wandered over said the blonde must be. Noticing the dance floor heating up like a sauna, security guards rushed in, pushing through the crowd like they were auditioning for a wrestling match. When they spotted Xiao Yun holding the knucklehead by the throat, they asked what was going on. He demanded Du Yen be brought in, and they cautiously asked who he thought he was. The young man proudly declared his name, making sure to mention he was from the Tang family. This revelation didn't just surprise the guards. It practically knocked their socks off as they stepped back in disbelief. Suddenly, a smiley gentleman emerged from the crowd, asking what the young master from the Tang family found so distressing. Our furious young man explained that his sister was nearly drugged, and who knows what could have happened if they hadn't intercepted that drink. President Du stumbled back upon hearing the news, but the guards were quick to check on him. He waved them off, assuring them everything was peachy. However, his gruff tone suggested that things were about to get real. When he ordered them to drag the troublemaker into the street and break his legs, they hopped to it like he was the boss of the year. After dealing with that little fiasco, President Du turned to young Master Tun and asked if he was cool with this course of action. Meanwhile, Yuxin, who had whimsically declared that she was done dancing and wanted some karaoke butt in, Du promised to set it up right away. From the outside, President Du seemed as charming as a teddy bear, but Ning Bay had a gut feeling he couldn't shake. It was an intuition thing. The man wasn't exactly Nancy's shoelaces either, so he told his crew to keep an eye on him. When a woman suggested they just grab him, the gentleman shot back, saying she must have lost a few marbles if she thought antagonizing power. As everyone finally simmered down a bit, the guys noticed Ning Bay was on edge like a cat in a room full of rockers. They weren't wrong. Our hero felt like someone was lurking, and he shared his nerves with his pals. Little did they know the person keeping tabs on them was sweating bullets, because the assignment from Du just went south, with Yaun doubting anyone would keeping a close eye on him. The woman behind him asked why they weren't just grabbing him right away. Turning around, the guy bluntly told his assistant she must have been dumb if she thought poking the bear of powerful families was a bright idea. Once everyone calmed down after the earlier drama, the guys noted that Ning Bay looked way too twitchy, like a cat on a hot tin roof. They weren't wrong. Our guy was genuinely stressed because he sensed someone was creeping on them, so he filled his buddies in on it. It wasn't just them that heard it, but also the one lurking in the shadows. It was chilling to realize that Du's mission had flopped, but Yaun doubted anyone would dare to tail them. Ba assured him to chill out. After all, the intended target wasn't even him. Deciding to switch gears, Yong asked how his new buddy figured out that the jerk who hurt him wasn't a warrior yet. According to Bay, warriors had specific traits, like being able to channel energy into their punches like a pro. After hearing this, Ying concluded that if he got hit by one of those warriors, he'd be in a hospital bed for a month. Their chat was interrupted by Yusin, who suggested they ditch the boring talk for some happy singing. Some guests began to egg Ning Bay on, joking that he should sing for his fiancée to show off, because refusing would be a big no-no for the birthday girl. These guys were still convinced he was just a nobody from the Ning family, thinking he was high and mighty, when really he was worse than a stray dog. Their mouths slammed shut when a kick sent them scooting to the edge of the couch. Joel chimed in, asking why they loved spewing nonsense so much. He suggested they clear out if they couldn't just chill with them. One of the instigators was ticked off by this suggestion, honestly shocked that Xiao Yun would dare argue over some scum. But Xiao Yun advised that the rich kid was overestimating himself because stirring up trouble with him was a quick trip to nowhere. Leaving that obnoxious guest behind, he cheekily remarked that they'd see who had more to lose. After all, Brother Yawking was just a rookie fighter. Ningbi tried to brush off the jabs and loud-mouthed insults aimed his way. But when the abandoned dog comment came up again, he snapped. In a flash, he was right up in the face of his nemesis, squeezing his throat until the poor guy could hardly breathe. His fierce aura sent shockwaves through the crowd, everyone suddenly realizing that Ba was packing some serious warrior heat. Yui approached to inform. However, when he was called a stray mutt again, he lost it. In a flash, he got up close and personal with the object of his ire and squeezed his throat so tight the guy couldn't breathe. His intense presence was felt by everyone at the party. They were shocked to discover Ba was packing warrior-level power. Yui approached and reminded him. Shu Jinyang, who actively sought trouble, was as clueless as a fish out of water because his family kept him on a tight leash. Shin could only stare in horror as chaos erupted around him. She wished her fiancé wouldn't be the one stirring the pot, but it seemed he couldn't resist the allure of a good brawl. Ningbay's grip on the throat of some loudmouth was tighter than a vice. The girl pleaded for him to ease up, insisting that if he didn't, the poor chap would meet his maker and that blood would be on Ba's hands. But the other guys, surprisingly, cheered our hero on saying he was just teaching this rascal a lesson, though they agreed that a death shouldn't overshadow the festivities. Xuanyang's buddies started yelling that if a warrior like him even thought about killing a regular Joe, the special ops crew of the Dragon Guard would swoop in like superheroes on a mission. This made Ning Bay spin around and ask why he should give a hoot about the special ops crew. Realizing his threats weren't fazing the guy one bit, Genyang's pal bolted down the hall, shouting about a warrior going on a killing spree. Xiao Yun tried to chase after him, but it was like trying to catch smoke with a net. The crew froze as a guard approached, clearly responding to that ruckus. Xiaoan couldn't believe someone was actually going to crash their showdown. Yayong was just as shocked that this little rascal managed to call in the Dragon Guards. He told Xiao Yun to get Bei to chill and promised to handle it himself. As he approached the warrior, he tried to plead for mercy, stating he served in the Dragon City garrison too, but the guard didn't even glance his way. He strolled past and flat out said that the special ops were on duty and anyone who got in the way was toast. At that moment, Yong knew they were in deeper trouble than they'd bargained for. Ready to face the music, he dashed toward the guard, wanting to put an end to this madness. The Dragon City Guard responded with a kick that knocked all the wind out of Wuong. Xiao Yun noticed and demanded in a voice like thunder how this punk dared to mess with his third brother. He was so fired up, he started closing in on this warrior, the flames of vengeance lighting up his eyes, ready to strike back. The guard figured it was time to stop babying these spoiled brats who thought they could get away with anything. So he pulled out his weapon. When he swung his sword, Xiao tried to kick it out of the way, but it was obvious to everyone that meaning someone had to step in. Ning Bay heard a commotion nearby and decided they were in trouble, faster than a speeding bullet shoving aside the punk whose throat he'd been squeezing. Our hero bolted toward the noise, racing to confront the guard, barking an order to put an end to the chaos, like a coach trying to calm a wild game. But the order fell on deaf ears as the man swung his blade, aiming to hit Bay, who just barely managed to leap back to a safe distance. The officer chimed in saying that as a martial artist, Ning Bay broke the law by attacking a civilian and he needed to be punished. Our hero shot back grumbling that if the guy understood the law so well, he should have remembered it's illegal to raise a sword against comrades. The guard's sword dropped in a flash, though his face was simmering with rage as he demanded to know who was standing before him. Instead of chatting, Ning Bay whipped back his cloak, revealing his sword, like a magician showing his trick ready to drop the mic. Covering her face, Chinhi sighed, realizing there was no way to reform this guy, especially since he still managed to sneak weapons into places like clubs. Sure enough, the sword made the guard realize he was up against a big deal. Introducing himself as Han Lee, the spectators were left in a state of shock. They had no idea why the city guard was bowing to this guy and even calling him commander. Ewing looked at his new buddy with wide eyes, unable to fathom that the Northern King's sword was right in front of him. A couple of seconds later, Ning Bay ordered the guard to get up because there was no need for all this unnecessary pomp. Chinhi approached him and reminded him to steer clear of brawls or else she'd spill the beans to Auntie Ching. Sighing heavily, the young man relaxed a bit and seemed no longer bent on swinging for the fences. But the fire of anger in his eyes didn't fully extinguish, especially when he demanded the girl give him her phone. While our hero was lost in the depths of his smartphone, he commanded the guard to haul away the creep lying on the floor. Sheng Yang's friend could only watch, utterly helpless, as he got dragged across the ground without even an ounce of dignity. Meanwhile, Ning Bay kept his eyes glued to his phone, searching for something. Apparently, he was looking for someone who was enjoying a well-deserved break after a long day's grind trying to recharge their batteries. When he answered the call, the gentleman grumbled about who he had the honor of speaking to. His voice was low, but you could tell he was fuming that someone had interrupted his vacation. Ning Bay figured giving his name was pointless because this person would recognize him by his voice anyway, as fate would have it, of course, to steer clear of fighting, because otherwise she'd spill the beans to Auntie Ching. Letting out a sigh, the young man calmed down a bit and looked like he wasn't about to turn someone into a punching bag. But the rage in his eyes didn't fade, especially when he demanded the girl hand over her phone. While our hero fiddled with something on his smartphone, he ordered the guard to haul the jerk sprawled out on the floor away immediately. Sheng Yang's friend could only watch as he was dragged across the floor, no one even bothering to give him a hand up. Meanwhile, Ning Bay kept staring tensely at his phone, searching for something. Apparently, he was hunting for someone who was catching some well-deserved Z's after a long day trying to recharge. When he finally answered the phone, the gentleman grumbled about who he had the pleasure of speaking with. The man's voice was muted, but you could tell he was boiling since he'd been disturbed during his downtime. Ning Bay thought it pointless to give his name. The guy would surely recognize him by his voice. As luck would have it, he did, and was utterly shocked the young gentleman was ringing him up at such a late hour. He quickly blurted out that he hadn't checked in with Ning's family in ages and was feeling pretty guilty about it, even inviting the lad over whenever he felt like it. But the young man replied that this was not the prime time for company. All he wanted to know was if there was someone named Liang Zhou in the Liang clan. Cold sweat started to trickle down the gentleman's forehead as he heard the name. He anxiously asked what this guy had gotten himself into. Instead of answering, Ning Bay wondered if the Lord wanted to take matters into his own hands or if he wanted him to handle the dirty work. After that, Genyang's friend froze, realizing just how deep he was in it. The gentleman kept quiet, only requesting the phone be passed to his relative so he could get a grasp on what was going on. When the young man took the phone, he thought his grandfather was going to school him on how to act so that he wouldn't have any trouble. But instead, old man Liang bluntly ordered him to kneel down. The young man's face showed pure disbelief. He couldn't fathom that his granddad was telling him to humiliate himself in front of someone like that. Realizing he had no other choice, he lowered his gaze and slowly knelt down, his legs shaking whether from fear or fury. The elderly gentleman didn't enjoy making his grandson do that either. One could only hope that the boy wouldn't hold it against him, as it was the only way to keep his life. After passing the phone back to Chinhi, our hero said it was getting late, which meant it was high time they headed home. Xiao Yun also checked the clock and informed the guests that the party was wrapping up and everyone needed to head out. Approaching Ning Bay, the guys asked if he was packing general level strength. The latter nodded his head in agreement without a hint of pride. But Wang quickly figured out that his brother was still in the dark about a lot, seeing as the guy standing in front of them was way more powerful than your average general. It was as clear as day that the King of the North wanted to keep a low profile, which is why he wasn't spilling the beans about his status without a valid excuse. When Xiaoan probed him about it, wondering why everyone called him Commander, he brushed it off as just a title and swiftly changed the subject to the fact that their tipsy friend Yu King needed a lift home. And honestly, the girl was in rough shape. The booze had knocked her out cold, and she was snoozing right there on the couch next to the table. Ning Bay noticed Wang looked a bit banged up. He offered his medic skills to help out, but Wang waved it off, saying it was nothing a good nap wouldn't fix. This earned a hearty laugh from Xiao Yun, who chimed in that even though his third brother was all grown up, he was still scared of doctors. Our hero powered up and told Wang to stay put, declaring he was about to give him a checkup. A burst of energy split into 3 little beams that shot straight into the guy's chest. As the lights faded, Yufeng stumbled and erupted into a coughing fit, blood pouring out of his mouth like a scene from a horror flick. Despite the bloody situation, Ning Bay asked if he felt any better. Frightened, Xiao Yun shot back, asking what kind of nonsense that was, since it was obvious his brother was just getting worse. Coughing up blood was definitely not a sign of improvement. Yang took a moment to collect himself, clearly struggling to catch his breath. Then, to everyone's shock, the guy straightened up and flashed a grin, insisting he felt way better than before. Ning Bay's voice was laced with satisfaction, claiming that Yuf's body was now tip-top, and those old injuries were a thing of the past. Meanwhile, Chinhi started whining in the back, saying she was exhausted and could barely keep her eyes open, so he promised they would head home soon. After bidding farewell to the crew, they shuffled toward the exit. It was wild how quickly some folks could become friends, but their exit wasn't without its bumps. There were some people keen on holding them up for a bit longer. The guards that intercepted our hero and his fiancée informed them that the big boss wanted a word with him. Hearing this, the girl got all tense, fearing yet another pickle, but her companion casually told them to lead the way. The elevator whisked them up to the 7th floor, where warriors stood stacked in 2 neat rows on either side of the wall, guarding the man seated in the center of the room. The gentleman began saying that Su Qin had nothing to do with the conversation he wanted to have with Ning Bay. So he ordered a car to be arranged for her to go home. The previously calm girl suddenly blew a gasket when she heard they wanted to send her home like a kid. She shouted that no one would dare disrespect her man. However, the guy calmly placed his hand on her shoulder, assuring her there was no need to panic because he had enough oomph to handle any hiccup. The warriors didn't care about the young lady's protests, so they simply escorted her out of the office and to the door. No matter how much she yelled to let her back in, they just shrugged it off. The most unsettling thoughts started swirling in Chinhi's mind. Judging by the way these folks were acting, they clearly had it in for Ning Bay. Meanwhile, Mr. Du barely keeping his temper in check. The wildest thoughts crept into Chinhi's head. Judging by how these folks were acting, they clearly weren't wishing Ning Bay luck. Meanwhile, Mr. Du was barely holding back his fury. He asked if the young man knew who he had bumped into this morning. Suddenly, our hero recalled that obnoxious guy he had clashed with, ma'am. Honestly, he thought that jerk had it coming. He pondered who he had actually hurt. The answer didn't take long to surface. Bang! He slammed his fist on the table and passionately yelled that his son, Duho, had been injured. Poor guy lost his arm and nearly kissed death. Now he wanted revenge and declared that Ning Bay would be meeting his maker by nightfall. Unfortunately, a phone call pulled him from his vengeful thoughts. On the other end was someone questioning if Du Yuan had lost his marbles by daring to attack one of his kin. Gritting his teeth, the club owner shot back at young Mr. Tun. He reminded him he had already been super nice by not ruining his sister's birthday, but there was no way he could let this slide without avenging his son. After that, he hung up and told his guards to prepare their swords. Too bad for him, Ning Bay was not someone who would go down without a fight. He wasn't about to hand his enemies an easy victory, so he pulled out his sword with flair. Like a blur, he unleashed precise strikes that sent his opponents crumpling to the ground, totally incapacitated. One after another, they flopped down like dominoes. Once the guards were done, Ning Bay sauntered over to the instigator of this whole mess, who was clearly trying to dodge the dirty work. Duan and his sidekick were shaking in their boots, unable to utter a single word. It was insane for them to believe that a general-level martial artist was standing right before them. Sizing up their terror, Ning Bay cranked up his aura, making it completely overwhelming and driving his enemies into a frenzy of fear. The sheer force of his presence rattled the door, giving a peek into the chaos unfolding inside the office. Chinhi, calling for backup, was utterly stunned by the scene. The gang couldn't help but ask what had happened to Ning Bay. This was prime time for Duan to schmooze his way out of trouble. He hurried over to Mr. Tang, begging for mercy. The owner of the establishment began groveling at his feet, pleading for assistance, but all Mr. Tang wanted was to shake this guy off as soon as possible. Yet the guys got a bit too comfy and thought they'd secured victory. They dropped their guard, which allowed the enemies to snatch Chinhi. Mr. D's assistant aimed a gun at the girl and ordered her friends to stay put. No matter how brave the lads were, they froze in place, terrified that Chinhi might get hurt due to their bickering. Ning Bay sternly told the woman to set his fiancée free immediately, or else she'd be in for some serious regret. But guess what? This lady wasn't dumb either. She pointed out that she knew Ning Bay's rank was general, so she understood he could reach her in a blink. The catch: everyone knew that no matter how speedy Bay was, it would take just 1 second for her to pull the trigger, meaning he couldn't outpace the bullet. Those words didn't shake our hero's confidence one bit. He asked her why she thought he was merely a general. Even though she was quaking in her boots, she figured he was just bluffing and had a reality disconnect. As soon as Ning Bay unleashed his energy, a swirl of blue light surrounded him. That power seemed to obliterate any boundaries or notions of space itself. Only the source of that energy existed, and his adversaries were simply targets to be eradicated. Even Ning Bay's pals were barely hanging on amidst the violent whirlwind that demolished everything in its path. Duan was trembling like a leaf, fully aware that the pressure was unlike anything and could squash an entire army. No matter how Ning Bay tried to mask his powers, it was now as clear as day that the true god of war stood right before them. And boy, was he furious, ready to obliterate his foes. No matter who said what, Ning Bay managed to get ahead of the woman and disarm her before she even had a chance to blink. The poor lady didn't even immediately grasp what hit her. It took a couple of seconds for her to realize she had lost a wrist. At that moment, pain engulfed her, but our hero, he was already snatching Chinhi from her grasp, hoping to carry her away to safety. Screaming in terror, the girl covered her ears and eyes, trying to tune out the madness. Ning Bay wrapped her up and gently told her not to look at the havoc he had wreaked. Sobbing, the young lady sought solace in him and found it. He was doing everything he could to reassure her that everything would turn out peachy keen. Turning his head, the young man demanded in an anger-laden voice if his foes understood the price they would pay for messing with his fiancée. Dropping to her knees, the woman began to plead for mercy from the mighty god of war, admitting she had underestimated her chances of going up against him. But no one was about to forgive her, since not many people made it onto the elite list he wanted to protect. And unfortunately for her, she was one of them. The criminal was so flabbergasted by what was happening that she was taken aback when a strange card was tossed her way, landing just in front of her. Scooping Chinhi into his arms, our hero declared she had been through enough, and he didn't want to tarnish the sword of the Northern King, making this lady think that she'd walked away unscathed. With a shaky hand, she picked up the dark card from the ground and froze in realization. She seemed to fully understand what it meant. Yuang immediately recognized the sword card, gently wrapped her in his arms, and urged her not to dwell on what he had just done. Sobbing, the young lady sought solace in him, and he did his best to reassure her that everything was going to be just fine. Turning his head, the young man asked fiercely if his opponents realized the cost they would incur for messing with his fiancée. Dropping to her knees, the woman began pleading for mercy from the mighty god of war, admitting that she had seriously miscalculated, thinking she could stand up to him. Unfortunately, no one had the grace to forgive her because there weren't many folks on his save list, and she was definitely one of them. The criminal was completely clueless as to what to expect, so she was utterly taken aback when a weird card was tossed her way, landing just a few feet from her. Picking Chinhi up in his arms, our hero told her she had been through enough, and he didn't want to get the sword of the Northern King all dirty so her enemies wouldn't be pleased, thinking they could take her life today. With shaking hands, she grabbed a black card off the floor and froze. It seemed she suddenly understood what it meant. Yuong instantly recognized the sword card. It was a sign nobody in their right mind would want to see. After that, Ning Bay just casually strolled out of the boss's office with Zhao Yun trailing behind him, bewildered that someone could just shrug off all those threats like they were nothing but bad jokes. For Chinhi's sake, he was ready to go above and beyond. But today, he decided to keep it simple, hopped in the car, and drove the girl home. Jen was behind the wheel, and he had no worries trusting him with the ride. So our hero took a deep breath and asked the guy to take them to the Su family's place. Young Master Tang was absolutely fuming about what just went down. He vowed to take care of Du Yan, and he knew he had to apologize to Grandma Su since Chin was definitely tipsy. Yang, sitting next to him, told his brother to chill about the enemies. I mean, if you get a mark from that lady, even the god of war wouldn't stand a chance. The only problem was the guy didn't get the joke and asked for a little clarification. His brother told him to drive with a little more finesse, and he'd explain later. There were a bunch of people at the club tonight, but these weren't your average partygoers. They were folks who weren't playing around at all. Zhao Yunshan and his team rolled up on the scene, but he was not impressed with what he saw. In the doorway of the club manager's office stood a soldier wearing a uniform that was all too familiar to him. This guy showing up here was definitely not a good sign. Yunan's head was buzzing with questions. But first, he asked what Ko Jong-tan, the leader of Chin's crew, was doing in such a tight spot. Wiping the blood from his hands with a napkin, the man smugly said that Captain Shaw was late to the party, and he had already handled things himself. Moving in a little too close for comfort, Yan reminded him that this mess was the special ops team's job. So naturally, he was a bit puzzled as to why the secret department was getting involved in this. Grinning like a Cheshire cat, Gene said he was just following orders, which was the only reason he was around. After that little chat, the secret agent dashed over to his buddies from the other squad. This unpredictable behavior had Yun Shan on edge since he had no clue what this guy was capable of or what he'd do next. By the time the car rolled up to the mansion, it was well into the night, with the moon shining like it owned the place. Once home, Chinhi's first thought was to jump in the bath to wash away the day when she saw bloodshed so closely. Flashbacks of Ning Bay always being there for her and fighting off their enemies flooded her mind. Splashing water on her face, she muttered that she needed to forget about everything that happened and stop dwelling on it. She figured it was time to get out of the bathtub and hit the hay, since those nagging thoughts were ready to swallow her whole. Wrapped in a towel, Chinhi strolled through the house, towel drying her wet hair. She was so sleepy that she didn't bother looking around at all. Because of that, she completely missed Ning Bay, who was lounging on the sofa and engrossed in a book. When he heard her footsteps, he snapped to attention and looked up. But when he spotted her, he relaxed and didn't freak out. After all the craziness, he was hyper-aware, and the sudden surprise made him jump. Chinhi asked what he was doing there. She never imagined he'd be waiting around for her. The young lady felt so flustered and embarrassed to be looking this way in front of him that she decided to bolt. She ran off so fast that she even lost a shoe like a fairy tale princess. Hiding behind the door, her only thought was how mortifying it was to be caught looking like that. Once in her room, she raced over to her sleepwear drawer, but then an unexpected thought hit her. Should she ditch her cute pajamas for something a little more daring? Realizing she was even considering that, she froze in shock. Never in her wildest dreams did she think she'd be pondering such things. It gnawed at her, making her toss one of her cute nighties back into the drawer. Covering her face with her hand, she told herself to calm down instantly. All these thoughts were just from the stress of the day. Finally, she picked out an adorable nightie that showed off her figure and headed out to thank Ning Bay for saving her. But when she finally mustered the courage to look up, she saw the couch was empty, and the guy she was all flustered about was nowhere to be found. That got her riled up, since she'd literally worked up the nerve to come down only for him to bail. As it turned out, the guy wasn't going anywhere. He just went up to the roof of the Su family mansion to meditate and recharge his energy. He sat there so long that the moon had been replaced by a bright sun. When the first rays of sunlight broke through, he activated his energy and started soaking in the natural light. The energy formed into a tiny purple sphere radiating some serious power. After spinning the sphere in his hands, Ning Bay immediately figured out what to do with it. The window in Chinhi's room was wide open, letting him sneak in without a sound. Chinhi was snoring peacefully and didn't even stir when he burst into her room. For a few seconds, he just watched the morning sun's rays dance across her skin. Then he pulled out the purple orb and activated it, releasing its power into the sleeping girl's body. This made her wake up and spring to her feet on the bed, completely bewildered. Him that he had just taken off. Turns out the guy didn't really leave. He just headed up to the rooftop of the Su family mansion to meditate and recharge his energy. He sat there so long that the moon was swapped out for a bright sun. Once the first rays kissed the earth, he activated his energy and began soaking up that natural light. The energy morphed into a tiny purple sphere radiating noticeable power. After rolling the sphere around in his hands, Ning Bay immediately figured out what to do with it. The window in Chinhi's room was wide open, allowing the guy to sneak in quietly and unnoticed. Manhwa was sound asleep and didn't even stir when he barged into her room. For a few moments, he just stood there admiring the rays of the morning sun lit up her skin like a lamp at a late-night diner. Then he whipped out a purple orb and activated it, letting the power ooze into the snoozing girl's body. This woke her up, causing her to pop up on the bed like a startled jack-in-the-box, trying to figure out what an uninvited guest was doing in her bed. When her sleepy mind finally realized it was Ning Bay lounging around, she screamed and asked what on earth he was doing there. The guy casually replied that her body was totally weak, so he was putting some energy into it to buff her up. Naturally, the girl thought he was pulling her leg because how ridiculous does that sound? So she chucked a pillow at him. As she bolted from the room, Chinhi yelled that a story like that wouldn't fool even a toddler. You could practically hear her irritation echoing down the hallway. This bizarre behavior left Ning Bay completely flabbergasted, standing there like a deer in headlights as he watched her dash away. With her loud stomping and sniffling, she made enough noise to wake the entire mansion. Bursting into Grandma Sue's room, she declared with a tone full of fury that her fiancé was a total creep. Grandma raised an eyebrow and asked what he had done. That question left Chinhi speechless, because truth be told, he hadn't really done anything. She stuttered while trying to explain. The guy hadn't laid a finger on her. He just sneaked into her room with his so-called concentrated energy that was supposed to boost her strength. Grandma chuckled softly at that. She muttered that the guy was just looking out for her, and instead of appreciating it, Chinhi was causing a scene all over the house. The anger faded, and suddenly her mind was flooded with dreamy visions of this caring guy she had been promised to as a kid. Watching her granddaughter blush, Grandma Sue chuckled, realizing this girl was young and completely clueless about her feelings. That morning, Ning Bay headed to the university to keep his promise to Chinhi. As soon as he walked into the building, he was whisked off to his very own office. Since the guy wasn't a student, but had taken on the role of the dean, there BA was already waiting with Professor Wang's ancient notebook. After flipping through a few pages, it became evident that it had records of mountain hikes where a particularly spiritual stone was discovered. But there was a hitch. 3 pages had mysteriously vanished, which meant only one thing. There could be real nuggets of information missing that would help in the quest. The professor who had given him the notebook looked shocked and claimed he had no clue. Ning Bay explained that the entries only covered the week before the hike. The man's face twisted in horror as he asked if the 3 missing pages were important. Ning Bay was pretty certain those pages got removed for a reason, but with hints from the previous 7 pages, they could narrow down the search area. This news gave the professor a bit of hope, and he smiled genuinely as he said he was glad to assist. Nodding, Ning Bay asked if there were any conditions the professor wanted to throw into the mix for his help. The guy blushed and quickly assured that he wasn't thinking anything like that, before suggesting he'd love to see Ning Bay in his lab. Hearing that invitation, the boy promised to swing by the lab before his lecture. Keeping his word, he soon found himself in front of the professor all ears as the man rambled on about his groundbreaking research into anti-gravity. The professor believed his discoveries could lead to alternatives for oil. Ning Bay added that if they slapped anti-gravity devices on airplanes, it could really shave off time during takeoff and landing. As for energy, Ning Bay figured that nuclear energy was still a solid alternative for now over gravity energy. In response, the professor frowned and lamented that their labs just didn't have what it takes for that kind of work, and building new ones would cost way too much. He comfortingly patted Ning Bay on the shoulder. Ning Bay acknowledged those issues, mentioning their country had been gearing up for nuclear energy for about 5 years now. But for it to succeed, they had to invest huge bucks and enlist the best experts. After that, Ning Bay promised to revisit this chat later since he needed to kick off his lecture. He suggested the professor come along. When the bell rang, the students hurriedly gathered in the auditorium and found their seats excited to see who the new instructor might be. Ning Bay strolled in slowly and made his way to the lectern. The students began whispering among themselves, puzzled as to why some random guy was in the professor's spot. One student said Professor Ning would be showing up any minute, so everyone better settle down, unless they wanted to face trouble. B.A. smiled sweetly at this warning, but thought it was completely unnecessary. Without a word, Ning Bay sat down in the teacher's seat and stared at the computer monitor. The students glared at him, clearly annoyed he wasn't budging. Soon enough, the classroom door swung open and the president's son entered alongside Professors Lee and Joe. What baffled the students was that even then, the mysterious stranger didn't budge and stayed put at the lectern. As the professors took their seats, Ning Bay introduced himself and announced he was about to kick off his very first lecture at BN University. A surprised murmur spread through the audience. No one could wrap their heads around the fact that the professor, looking so youthful, stood right before them, younger than some of the students. Ignoring the chatter, Ning Bay started the lesson, so everyone better grab a seat if they didn't want to stir up any trouble. B.A. flashed a sweet smile, thankful for the heads up even though it was totally unnecessary. Without a peep, our hero plopped down in the teacher's chair and stared at the computer screen like it owed him money. The students shot him dirty looks for sticking around. Soon the classroom door swung open, and the president's son strutted in, flanked by Professors Lee and Joe, like he was entering a VIP lounge. What blew the students' minds was that even then, the mysterious stranger didn't budge and kept standing at the podium like a statue. While the men took their seats, Ning Bay introduced himself and dropped the bomb that he was about to kick off his first lecture at BN University. A wave of surprised whispers rippled through the crowd. No one could believe the professor was standing right there in front of them because the dude looked younger than a few of the students. Ignoring all this buzz, Ning Bay kicked off the lesson by declaring that computer science was a theoretical subject with real-world perks. The grumpy students were quick to announce they already aced it since it was a beginner's class for freshman year. They practically begged for some fresh info or they'd just wither away from the boredom. With a sly grin, Ning Bay recognized he was facing a bunch of audacious kids who wouldn't pay him any mind so he stepped away from his comfy spot behind the lectern and scanned the sea of students, a plan brewing in his noggin. His older colleagues were a bit skeptical of the guy. One of them even suggested lending Ning Bay a hand to capture the audience's attention. But in the end, they concluded they'd let the young gun try his luck, thinking he could man up to the task ahead of him. Ning Bay flashed a smile at his pupils and confirmed they were spot on. He promised to shoot the info straight to their computers for them to tinker with on their own. One eager student chimed in suggesting they create a group to share files easily. But Ning Bay chuckled, saying it wasn't necessary because he could send everything right to them, no need for the group chat drama. The students whispered among themselves, totally baffled about how he could do that. Instead of explaining, their instructor took his time to start uploading files for delivery. Just a few minutes after Bay sent the files, notifications started pinging on the students' screens like it was New Year's Eve. The students were so hyped that the senior professors thought it might be time to intervene, but the principal's kid told them to chill. Grinning, the young instructor mused, "Looks like the students are way more into learning from me now." Indeed, their eyes were lit with curiosity, wanting to learn some of those cool tricks. With everyone wide awake and laser-focused on information security, our hero knew it was safe to kick off the lecture. Everyone was all ears. Even the old professors were huddled up trying to catch every last. Spotting one student who whipped out his camera, his buddy gave him a puzzled look and asked what he was up to. The guy just grinned wider and silently communicated that events like this were too good not to share online. The live stream skyrocketed in popularity, reaching way more people than anyone anticipated. One dorm-dwelling dude raced over to his friend, showing the live footage of Ning Bay's class already in full swing. He was completely blindsided to see his mates on the stream, so he ditched his work and settled in for the show. Realizing the instructor was some newbie, our hero was busy chatting with students, totally oblivious to the fact that a silly video of a dancing mouse had popped up behind him on the screen. At first, Ning Bay suspected it was a nasty virus, but when similar antics started cropping up on all the computers in the classroom, it couldn't possibly be a fluke. This little hiccup didn't faze Ning Bay one bit. He chuckled because he knew exactly how to play it. The cocky kid in the audience thought this new professor was just a softie. But this was a guy who was reputed to be among the country's finest hackers for a good reason. Ning Bay's voice burst through the speakers with irony, asking if such a big deal had really... The guys were so startled they nearly jumped from their seats, freaked out by the unfamiliar voice. Meanwhile, the prankster froze in his tracks when he realized he might be in some serious trouble. Suddenly, this computer lit up with Ning Bay's face, who schooled him about how he shouldn't be proud of his shenanigans. The whole dorm room realized it was the same Ning Bay in the spotlight now, which didn't exactly send chills down their spines. The audience in the auditorium erupted with laughter at how awkward the dorm guys looked on camera. One of the guys even went so far as to yank out the power cord, thinking it was the only way to zap the whole mishap. Once they did that, the chaotic stream finally cut out, but the guys were still in a frenzy. They scrambled to figure out how to wipe off the embarrassment, since a whole bunch of students just witnessed their epic fail. The irked hacker concluded if this new professor wanted to play games, he'd take on the one who trained him. So he called his teacher over at Yantai Financial Company. The man picked up right away, ready to soak in the tale of the mysterious Ning Bay, who seemed to have outshone his student. Joling knew the university well. After all, he was this kid's teacher, so he vowed to handle things promptly. Hacking wasn't his only gig. He was also the head of security for the largest company in Dragon City. Now, the real boss was stepping up to the plate and was fired up to show everyone what he could do. Meanwhile, one of the professors sidled up to Ning Bay, expressing admiration for how he had tamed those rascals in the dorm, working diligently at the computer. Ning Bay was just a wimp, but hey, he was still recognized as one of the top hackers in the country for a reason. Ning Bay's voice echoed out of the speakers, ironically asking if such a big shot had really done it. The guys jumped from their computer tables, spooked by that mysterious voice. But the culprit of this chaos froze, knowing the consequences were about to come knocking. His monitor lit up with Ning Bay's face, who informed him that being one of the best hackers wasn't exactly a badge of honor. When the students in the dorm room figured out that it was the same Ning Bay they were staring at, they weren't really quaking in their boots. The students in the auditorium erupted with laughter because it was just too funny to watch those guys in the dorm looking all kinds of awkward. The guys scrambled to cover up, hoping no one would notice their embarrassing appearance. But it was too late, and just their luck. Their buddy couldn't finish the broadcast. His computer just decided to stop listening altogether. One of the guys even went to the extreme of yanking the power cord. It was the only way to stop the madness. It was only after they did that everything came to a halt, and the screen blinked out, no longer broadcasting the dorm room. But the guys still couldn't calm down. They were racking their brains trying to figure out how to wash off the shame, since they had just been seen by a whole crowd of students. The disgruntled hacker figured that since this new professor wanted, so he dialed up his teacher, who worked at Yantai Financial Company. The man picked up immediately, all ears, ready to listen to the tale of the mysterious Ning Bay, who had clearly outdone his protege. Joling knew all about that university because, funny enough, he was the teacher of this student, so he promised he'd handle everything ASAP. Hacking wasn't his only gig. This guy was the head of security for the biggest company in Dragon City. So the real boss was about to step onto the scene and was hell-bent on showing everyone what he could. Joling knew exactly what university we were talking about. After all, he was this student's teacher, so he promised to handle everything ASAP. His side gig in hacking wasn't his only hustle. This guy was also the head of security for the biggest company in Dragon City, so now the real boss was stepping in, ready to show everyone what he was made of. Meanwhile, one of the professors swaggered over to Ning Bay and gushed in admiration about how he had whipped those dorm monkeys into shape. Sitting at the computer, our hero stumbled upon something bizarre. He told his coworker that their system was trying to hack someone. An elderly gentleman barked in disbelief, wondering if those pesky students were up to their old shenanigans again. Even though they had promised to play nice, Ning Bay was absolutely certain these weren't the usual suspects because the intruder's antics were totally off the wall. Now the man was on edge because he realized an outsider was trying to hack their system, and if someone made it into their network, it would be a total disaster. but Ning Bay reassured him that this computer was brand spanking new, so there was nothing on it to pilfer, and he wouldn't let anyone get to it. As Joling sipped his tea, he reveled in the success of his work. He figured Ning Bay's skills were pretty run-of-the-mill and utterly unimpressive. That was until another employee burst in with the shocking news that the company's firewall had been breached. Upon hearing this, the man nearly choked on his tea. He couldn't wrap his head around how this could actually happen. When he glanced at the computer, it became clear that they had indeed been hacked, as windows were popping up like popcorn and refused to close. Joling had personally set up the defenses, so he just couldn't accept that this system had been compromised. He even had hackers test it out, and it was foolproof. Rubbing his hair in frustration, he began to murmur that it was impossible no one had ever penetrated his defenses before. His coworker asked if they had ticked off any of the big wigs. Just then, Mr. Yangan stormed into the office, shouting and questioning if Yoling's system was entirely useless, since it couldn't fend off a hack. Notifications started rolling in like a tidal wave, announcing that the company's accounts had been locked down. Administrator statuses changed, and chaos reigned supreme. All internal confidential information was blocked. Naturally, the bosses began to sweat bullets at the thought that outsiders could snatch up sensitive customer deposit information. The boss, Mr. Yang, tried to convey the seriousness of the situation, explaining that the hacker had breezed through all 7 firewalls in just 15 seconds. That info sent chills down the gentleman's spine because he was convinced so now they were stuck waiting for that person to name their price. As soon as he finished saying that, Ning Bay's voice crackled through the speakers, asking what on earth they were chatting about. He was peeved at being mistaken for a blackmailer. Our hero's unexpected entrance made everyone in the office jump back from the speakers, staring in wide-eyed wonder. They just couldn't wrap their heads around how such a thing was possible. Mr. Yang leaned closer to the speakers, practically yelling into them, demanding to know what they had done to offend Ning Bay, since his gag was far from funny. The guy replied that he was insulted all right. He pointed out that an employee from this company had launched a hacking attack on his computer, and he took that personally. Everyone's eyes darted to Joling, who had suddenly gone quiet, looking away. It was clear he was the one tangled up in this mess. Scratching the back of his head, the man sheepishly muttered with a forced grin that it was just a little game he was playing. The supervisor was fuming. He was furious at this employee for causing them huge headaches instead of just doing his job. Lowering his head, Mr. Yang turned to Ning Bay, stating that the whole debacle happened because he had dropped the ball on staff discipline. Well, the man even promised to shell out $500,000 as an apology. But our hero claimed, as he did before, that money didn't tickle his fancy at all. To everyone's shock, Bay announced that their company's systems would be back on track in an hour. He hoped they learned a lesson from this little hiccup. Everyone graciously thanked Mr. Ning and waited for their work to return to normal. As he closed his laptop with a sense of victory, he glanced at his colleague and realized she was absolutely thrilled with his handiwork. Suddenly, a frantic Chinhi burst into the room, flanked by her friends. The look on the girl's face wasn't exactly sunshine and rainbows, but as soon as she spotted Professor Lee, her expression softened into something a bit friendlier. The professor was an older, wise fellow, so he quickly sensed that the young folks had something to discuss, which meant it was the perfect time for him to head back to his lab. As soon as the elderly man exited, that angry look returned to Chinhi's face. She sternly interrogated why the guy had taken her meal card. Twirling the very card in his hands, Ning Bay reminded the feisty girl that he had already told her to skip meals today. But those words only ignited her wrath, and she began to complain that due to him, she hadn't had breakfast, and now he was standing in the way of her lunch plans. The girl lunged to reclaim her precious card, but she was left empty-handed. Yuxin yawned lazily and suggested in a nonchalant tone that they could just grab lunch off campus instead of bickering over that card. But her friend was not having it. All she wanted was for that guy to quit tormenting her. However, no matter how hard Chinhi tried, she couldn't pry the card from his tenacious grip. At one point, he turned and started to stroll off. The girl panicked and shouted, asking where he was off to, just when she thought Ning Bay wouldn't reply. He forced a smile and declared that he was on his way to the cafeteria, then invited her to join him. Chinho wasn't as pumped about being invited by the groom-to-be as she was about finally. The guy forced a smile and declared that he was off to the cafeteria, offering her a chance to join. Chinhi wasn't as pumped about being invited by her future husband as she was about finally getting some food, finally getting to munch on something tasty. The cafeteria was in the next building over from the university and pretty close to Ning Bay's office. But when they arrived, it looked like a food war had broken out in the queue. People were yelling. Someone was guarding their soup like it was gold. It was total chaos. Chinhi wasn't up for a brawl over grub, so she suggested heading upstairs. The top floor was mostly teachers chowing down, and the food there was way better. That's when they spotted Xiao Yun sitting all high and mighty in his lonely throne. When he saw his sister surrounded by her crew, he cheerfully waved them over and invited them to crash his table. For some reason, Yukian wasn't thrilled to see him and snippily asked why someone like him was slumming it in such a fancy spot. All she got back was a cheeky grin. The food on the table smelled out of this world, instantly making Chinhi's stomach growl with hunger. With a big smile, she grabbed her chopsticks and aimed for a piece of roasted broccoli that looked unrealistically delicious. But before she could snag it, Ning Bay, acting like a food ninja, knocked the chopsticks right out of her hand. Her shock was off the charts. She fired back, demanding to know what his deal was. After all, didn't he invite her to eat? To which Ning Bay coolly replied that he asked her to keep him company, not to actually eat. The poor girl was fuming. She couldn't believe this cheeky guy would bring her along just to watch him feast. Ning Bay explained that he couldn't dig into his meal until the purple key was absorbed. The others exchanged puzzled looks, completely lost in translation. Their silence was broken when someone came up to their table. A grinning stranger chimed in saying the purple key was an Eastern thing, also known as sage aura. Then he went serious, adding that anyone protected by the violet key was basically a sage. Xiao Yun was not amused. He wished nothing more than for this guy to just disappear right then and there. But instead, the stranger swooped in and sat beside Yuqing, continuing to talk about how the violet qi was the holy grail of energies, rare even among martial artists. He mentioned that the legendary purple key was last spotted when the Grand Master of Taoism left the Han Empire on a little field trip west. Showing off his skills, Ning Bay activated his defensive strength with some purple qi and asked the stranger if this was the kind of magic he was talking about. Everyone was struggling to believe that this guy was casually flaunting his purple key like it was just a normal Tuesday. Yusin was practically glowing with excitement. With a big grin, she asked her new friend. The guy jumped from his seat, declaring that only sages could wield such energy. He then demanded to know who this purple Kai prodigy was. Instead of answering, our hero just smirked at Chinhi and said she had definitely been convinced that purple chi was the real deal. He promised to give her more tomorrow, but the girl was so fed up with Ning Bay's antics that she haughtily declared she didn't want any energy from him. As soon as she said no, their new buddy jumped on the opportunity, enthusiastically saying he'd love to be infused with such powerful energy. The weird offer left Bay completely speechless. He simply asked who the weirdo was and what he was even doing there. Realizing how silly he sounded, the guy quickly added he didn't mean anything by that and definitely wasn't asking for a free ride. He was totally prepared to pay. Yuqing turned to the stranger and informed him that he was talking to the eldest son of the Ning family, who really didn't need any money as it was. Upon hearing the name Ning, the guy's interest peaked and he started wondering why he hadn't heard of Bay before. Their little chat was cut off by Chinhi's loud demands for food, only to be told she would have to be patient a bit longer. All this bickering made Yusin laugh out loud. She asked if this was how they planned to roll like cats and dogs even after tying the knot. Chinhi's face turned a shade of crimson, and she reminded everyone that marriage was way off the table. She and Ning Bay were strictly friends. Chinhi made it clear that she'd stated from the get-go that marrying him was a hard pass. Yuqing tried to rile her up by asking if she didn't want to be the wife of a guy with such power. This did not sit well with Bay, so he pushed back his chair and reminded her that his fiancée could still call it off any time. With that, he stood up and walked away. Finally, the girl realized that out of anger she'd spoken too harshly, because if she was honest, she didn't want to break off the engagement at all. It took those sharp words for Chinhi to realize how much she might have hurt someone she merely considered a friend. She was starting to regret what she had said and began plotting how to fix this awkward mess. Her friend quickly caught on to her mood and understood what was swirling in her mind. Joy also jumped in with her 2 cents, saying that if she had no intention of breaking the engagement, then she, at any cost. Turning her head toward the stranger, Yuqing mentioned that the eldest son of the Ning family stood before her, and money was the least of his concerns. Upon hearing about the Ning family, this person instantly wondered why he hadn't heard about Ba before. His pondering was cut short by Chinho's loud shout, demanding if she was going to get some grub today, to which she was told to just hang tight a little longer. This playful banter made Yusin crack up. She wondered out loud if they were just going to keep bickering like cat and dog even after they tied the knot. This question made her friend blush and reminded her that marriage was off the table. She and Ning Bay were just pals. Chinho insisted that she had made it clear from the get-go that she wasn't marrying him. Yuqing started poking fun, asking if she didn't want to be the wife of such a powerful man. These words didn't sit well with Ba, prompting him to rise from his seat and remind her that his fiancée could ditch the engagement anytime she felt like it. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Finally, the girl realized that in her anger, she had said too much, because honestly, she didn't want to break off the engagement. It was only after those harsh words flew out that Chinho realized just how much she had probably offended someone she had merely called a friend. She started regretting her words and thinking about how to make amends for this awkward situation. Her friend immediately caught the gloomy vibe and guessed what was on her mind. Joy chimed in, sorta leaning toward the opinion that if she didn't mean to break off the engagement, then she should get her act together. I probably shouldn't have cracked jokes about stuff like that. After saying those words, the girl's health took a nosedive, and she realized she'd really messed up big time. Meanwhile, Ning Bay cruised back to his office and immediately rang up his dad to spill the beans that he had called it quits with Jen, so they needed to have a sit-down with Grandma Sue about the engagement being kaput. His dad tried to pry into what went down between him and his fiancée, but the kid was quicker than a rabbit and cut the call short. He leaned against the window, staring off into space, surprised that this decision made his chest feel tight like a pair of too small shoes, and it hit him that he was letting go of something really vital. A bunch of professors were huddled in the gravity research lab, eyes glued to the door like kids waiting for a surprise party. Mr. Lee introduced them to Ning Bay, a guy who looked more like he should be chasing ice cream trucks than being the honorary director of their research lab. This news caught everyone off guard because the dude looked way younger than a teacher, more like he'd just graduated high school. Ignoring the bewildered faces of his colleagues, our hero took a gander at the equipment and thought it seemed pretty basic and not complicated at all. One of the lab workers, Hu Chong, yelled out that Ning Bay was making a mountain out of a molehill. After all, they had some top-notch tools. This guy pointed at the gravity measuring machine and bragged that it was worth 8 million and there was only one of its kind in the whole Dragon City. Ning Bay shot back that he had seen inventions that cost more than 15 million. This statement sent shockwaves through the employees. They started buzzing with disbelief, asking if it was really true. A light bulb went off in Hu Chong's head. He asked if Mr. Ning was talking about the A513 model. Ning Bay nodded with a grin and mentioned that there were 2 of them stashed away in the lab by the northern border. He even promised to call and arrange for one of those machines to be sent over that very night. Some professors couldn't contain their excitement and let out squeals. They had never experienced anything like this before and were still trying to digest the idea. Though total shock on his colleagues' faces led our hero to wonder if the lab's funds were hurting that much. Mr. Lee cleared the air by saying that gravity research barely got any publicity, and most patrons thought they were a bunch of charlatans. Picking up the phone, the guy decided that in that case, Ning's conglomerate would front the investment on the condition that he got 90% of future profits and patents. Upon hearing this sweet offer, Hu Kyung piped up saying Bay was asking for too much, but Professor Lee quickly hushed him. According to Lee, Ning Bay's work in this field was ahead of anything he had ever tried. So if all he wanted was cash, he could have managed just fine without it. Without even batting an eye and not bothering to check with his colleagues, Lee jumped at the offer. Once he got a thumbs up, our hero rang up Mushi and told her to wire 1 billion to the university's account. Plus, he suggested a little twist in the research direction and wanted to kick things off with basic anti-gravity devices. After that, the employees dived into their work like kids on a trampoline. They were all itching to see how this young dude would shake things up. Every time they approached Ning Bay for tips or approvals, he happily teamed up with the lab techs. They were so engrossed in their projects that they didn't even realize the workday had vanished, and it was well past dusk. The only thing that snapped them out of their research groove was a thunderous sound that was impossible to ignore. Turns out it was a private helicopter landing on the rooftop. Nobody had a clue what was happening or why a chopper decided to land on the sports field. A guy in uniform hopped out and proclaimed they were there to complete an A1 level escort mission, instructing all outsiders to step aside. Everyone was buzzing about this massive state-of-the-art transport which could even haul tanks into battle. A female employee chimed in, reminding Ning Bay that the military had ordered outsiders to keep their distance. But when he didn't stop, it became clear he was the star of the show as the military man saluted the commander and introduced himself as Lu Chin from the 6th Escort Squad. Next thing you know, the whole crew lined up in neat rows and shouted a raucous welcome to Ning Bay, who is now dubbed as the commander. Even Professor Lee was caught off guard because he was convinced Ning Bay was just a science whiz, while his colleagues assumed the kid was merely a wealthy heir. It was time to seriously rethink who was actually standing in front of them. A few minutes later, Ning Bay was back home. Upon stepping through the door, the kid was shocked to see his parents, still up at such a late hour. Turns out they couldn't catch a wink of sleep thanks to the news their son dropped over the phone. So now they were all ears for the details about why he chose to split from Chin. Turning away from them, Ning Bay confessed that the girl was dead set against this marriage, so he figured it wasn't worth it to push it and beat a dead horse. That was his final word. Without waiting for his parents to say a peep, he bolted out to the patio to gulp in some fresh night air and clear his head after a roller coaster of a day. But the walk didn't do him much good. So he decided to go for a different kind of distraction and took a leap soaring upwards. When he climbed onto the roof, he spotted Xiao Yan Sha, who bowed respectfully to him and greeted him with a smile. Our hero couldn't help but wonder if the squad leader had tracked down the third target he needed to take out. Toth sighed, saying he hadn't found the guy yet, but suspected he was lurking among Kuo Zhongdan's crew. As the head honcho of Chinjo Abu, it made total sense for him to worry about Ning Bay's safety, but the young guy just brushed it off. He wasn't in the mood to fuss about his own safety at the moment. Meanwhile, back at the Su family mansion, there was someone else struggling to find peace, even in dreamland. No matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't catch those Z's. Her brain was stuck on replay, buzzing with words that should have never slipped from her lips. Just then, a loud knock on the door yanked her back to reality. She literally leapt into bed. Her overnight guest, her grandmother, waltzed in, and for some reason, she'd had a rough night too. Miss Su mentioned getting a call from Ching Hong Lang, who informed her that she and Ning Bay had decided to part ways. While the girl tried to wrap her head around the news, the old lady muttered that if there was no wedding in the cards, neither the Ning family nor the Su family would bring it up again. When she asked, still dazed, what was going on, Grandma spilled the beans that Ning Bay wasn't one to chase after girls. After hearing no several times, he just threw in the towel, turning away all sad-like. The old gal elaborated that this guy had quite the ego, but he'd tolerated Chinhi's antics up to a point. Now, though, his patience was running thin. As she sashayed out, she added that the engagement should be called off by the bride's side to save face in the future. After the door swung shut, the girl crumbled to her knees and started sobbing. Sadness and resentment swirled within her like a storm. Chinhi decided if her ex-fiancé wanted to split, she'd just find someone better. Returning to her room, Mrs. Su really hoped her granddaughter was making a wise choice and wouldn't regret her bold move. Meanwhile, the Su family's house was under tight surveillance, and now their foes had some juicy intel in their hands. The eavesdropper who caught Chinhi and Grandma's chat quickly dialed the right number to report that the engagement had hit the skids. Come morning, and the nerves from the previous day didn't fade one bit. Uninvited guests decided to crash the Su mansion. The head of the Gu household graced the place with his presence. He showed up with his son and was so overly polite it made one wonder what he was up to. The lady started speculating why they had come, shifting her gaze to the young man, declaring that the Gu family must be blessed by the gods. Mr. Gu shot back that he was far from the stunning Chinhi. As suspected, the gentleman had brought a marriage proposal with him. One of her grandkids reported back to her. With a cheeky smile, Mr. Gu began chatting about how their families had been tight for decades, and his son Kong Kong was really into Chinhi. Madame Su saw right through his motives and tightened up, saying the young man was too opinionated right now, so she needed to consult her granddaughter first. It was clear the man was pretty hopeful when he didn't hear a no, so he claimed he wouldn't be pushing it and had the servants haul in the gifts. More than a dozen fellas sauntered into the mansion, 2 by 2, lugging some hefty chests. Oblivious to the commotion, the homeowner asked what goodies lay within those crates. The head of the Gu family opened a few, giving everyone a glorious view of chests loaded to the brim with pure gold bars. The old lady was left gobsmacked when she realized they were engagement gifts. The fellow by Grandma's side wore a big grin, clearly thrilled that their fortunes had just taken a boost, and suggested the guests unwind after their journey. Just then, one of the guards burst in, announcing that there were important visitors waiting outside. Before the woman could even get up, Zhang Quan, known as the Central Blade, strutted into the hall. Grandma was way happier to see him than the previous guests. She immediately poured him some tea to chat, but he wasn't feeling the warm welcome. Without a word, he pulled out a black card and insisted the head of the Su family accept it. The elderly lady was left gaping at the table where the fateful card had landed. The hall fell into a stunned silence. No one dared to break it until Guang Kong picked up the card and asked his dad what was up. The master shouted at his son so loud that the poor dude dropped the card in shock. Knowing the card's implications, the head of the Gu family ordered the kid to put it back and mind his business. While Mrs. Su was trying to wrap her mind around all this, her grandson started rambling about how accepting the card would put the family under a heavy thumb. With her eyes shut, she nudged her grandson Chinhi to call Ning Bay immediately. But just then, Shin stormed into the room declaring in a determined voice that she would call her former fiancé herself. Shooting a glare at the formidable man, she boldly asked if he was acting on Ba's orders. When he didn't respond, she started punching Ning Bay's number into her phone, ranting about how he was making a big mistake. After all, instead of moving on, he was holding a grudge and sending his crew after her grandma. But luckily, there was no need to call, as Ning Bay had already breezed into the Su family mansion and waltzed into the living room. Zhang Quan bowed low to the King of the North in a heartbeat, and uncertainty and confusion were evident in his tone as he faced Ning Bay. Glaring at the imposing dude, she boldly asked if he was working under Ba's orders. When he didn't respond, she began dialing her dude's number, ranting that he was really crossing the line. Instead of moving on, he decided to hold a grudge and send his people after her grandma. But it was possible to handle things without making the call. Ning Bay had already made his grand entrance at the Su family mansion, strolling right into the living room. Zhang Quan bowed to the Northern King faster than you could say awkward. Uncertainty and confusion could be heard dripping from his voice like a melting ice cream cone. Our hero snagged the black card from the guy's hands and declared that he was all in. So now, every single Zhang family member from the 3 provinces could come at him like a swarm of angry bees. Dropping to his knees, the man insisted he wouldn't even dare to think about such a wild idea, let alone act on it. Mrs. Su released a sigh of relief, as it looked like their family was finally free from that nasty black mark. But her granddaughter was having none of it. She unleashed her inner critic, calling Ning Bay a total phony and a liar who had no clue what it meant to keep his word. Chinhi was so furious, she was practically on fire. She just couldn't wrap her head around the idea that someone like Zhang Quan would make a move without Ba's orders. As soon as she voiced her opinion, the man wanted to protest because that was totally false. But Ning Bay wasn't about to let him. He ordered him to zip it right away, claiming he'd already spilled enough tea. Getting closer, the girl, brimming with accusations, exclaimed that our hero was just a poser, trying to look all cool and powerful. But here, he was trying to scare an old lady with a black card. Waving her hand like a dramatic actress, the furious young lady warned that if anything happened to Sue's grandmother, she would make it her life's mission to get even. Seeing this hysterical girl throwing punches at the commander, Yongguan instantly pulled out his sword and told her to knock it off. Oh boy, Grandma Su could see where this crazy ride could lead. So she urged her granddaughter to stop digging a deeper hole right away. But she was unfazed by all those warnings and was so furious she was practically begging for trouble, boldly stating that Ning Bay could just go ahead and kill her. Tears streaming down her face, the young lady declared that even though her family was weak, Chinhi would never humiliate herself in front of him. Those words were seriously outrageous, and Zhengqin took a step closer to the girl, but the King of the North put his foot down. With steel ringing in his ears, he knew he had to comply, especially since our hero had just activated his overwhelming aura. Exhaling, Ning Bay calmed down a tad and plopped the bank card on the table, saying the cash from that card could be used any time, and with it the Su family would finally escape someone else's clutches. After that, Chinhi went silent. She was totally confused about what just happened and who the real villain was in this mess. Then he strolled past the girl without even glancing her way and said he wouldn't bother her any longer. Casually tossing on his cloak, the Northern commander declared that anyone who dared to mess with the Su family would face some serious consequences. Even Grandma Su was taken aback that the young man was stepping up as the protector of her family. All these problems freaked out poor Mr. Goose so badly that he ordered his crew to grab the gold crates and hightail it out of there. Chinhi was left standing alone on the doorstep, feeling like a total fool. She suddenly realized she had made a colossal blunder, but had zero clue on how to fix it. Despair hit her like a freight train and she cried her heart out, but even that didn't ease her pain. As he walked out of the mansion, Ning Bay mumbled that he had cleared his debt to the Su family today, but didn't feel an ounce of joy or relief. Turning to Zhong Quan, he gave him a heads up that the engagement was off, and he better not bother that family again. Arriving home, he noticed a bunch of fancy cars parked out front. That really had him on edge because, let's face it, that didn't sound like promising news. Guogo came running toward him shouting with joy, pulling him away from those unpleasant thoughts. Hugging his little sister, the boy temporarily forgot about his troubles and relaxed. Her genuine smile chased away the dark clouds looming in his mind. After lifting the little lady into his arms, Ning Bay approached his fourth uncle and asked what all the fuss was about. Kananan replied that all these folks had shown up with marriage proposals. Ning Bay was totally taken aback by this news, because their family had no unmarried girls to offer for marriage. Sure, there was the lovely Go, but come on, it's way too early to think about wedding bells. Spotting a man in the courtyard, our hero inquired if Mr. Lin had arrived. The man grinned widely and gave an enthusiastic nod. He was the head honcho of the black unit from the capital. Bay asked what brought him to their doorstep, to which the gentleman replied that he came with a marriage proposal. When it finally hit the guy that someone was proposing marriage, he freaked out because he had never even considered such a thing. Without letting his sister down, Ba listened to the juicy gossip that rumors had reached Mr. Lin about him breaking off the engagement, and he wanted to offer his granddaughter as a bride. Kang Yan chuckled and revealed that Mr. Lin was far from the first to wander over with such proposals. Upon entering the house, Ning Bay realized what his uncle was getting at. There were so many people there that you'd think someone had thrown a fancy reception. All the family representatives bowed to the King of the North and welcomed him. Yet, our hero knew perfectly well that these folks were only interested in his royal status, so he kindly informed them they had 1 minute to clear out of his house. This bold statement didn't scare the men one bit, and they hadn't even finished their suggestions. When they refused to budge, the young man snapped again, more forcefully insisting they'd better hurry up before they really ticked him off. That was enough to have those grown men scurrying away like they were children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Little Guo was astounded by her brother's tone. They better hustle before they make him really mad. Those words sent the grown men scattering like kids at a ghost story. The tone from her brother had little Guo wide-eyed and startled, who had hardly dealt with rudeness in her young life, but her brother gave her head a pat and assured her that everything was A-OK. The girl eased up and began to feel cozy again. Taking a step forward, Ba's father chuckled, saying there was no way anyone would be knocking on his door with a marriage proposal after this little fiasco. The guy finally set his baby sister down and firmly declared he had zero interest in matchmakers plotting to marry off his little gem. His dad wasn't too thrilled with that answer, since he and Mom thought after ditching the Su family engagement, it was time to find someone else. So he tossed out the idea that he look at a few potential candidates' photos. Ning Bay had zero intention of doing that, and to avoid any puppy dog eyes or begging, he just ripped those photos to shreds and strutted out of the house. The morning in the Su mansion kicked off with a hot gossip session about what was brewing at Ning's place. The grandmother informed her granddaughter that her ex-fiancé had been offered some pretty enticing brides, but he passed on each and every one of them. This really shocked and mildly thrilled Chinhi. Maybe this dude still had feelings for her, or he was so mad he wanted nothing to do with women anymore. Regardless, she couldn't help but grin because deep down she admired this guy's stubbornness and mystery. Noticing the girl's grin, Madame Su couldn't resist asking if her granddaughter truly didn't like Ning Bay. The girl begged the woman not to kick off this chat, saying she still had some not-so-great memories of how that guy behaved today. Those words made Madame jump out of her chair. She felt that if Ning Bay was really shutting the door on the Su family, he wouldn't have come by at all. Taking her granddaughter's hand, the woman muttered that it was pretty clear to her that Zhang Zhongquan was stirring up trouble without Ning Bay's blessing. Chinhi got a bit peeved and asked why he didn't just say it outright and didn't even bother to clarify anything. She fell silent when Nana explained that Ba had been acting cold since the young lady launched into accusations without even finding out why he dropped by. Clasping her hands together to prevent a tiny shiver, Chinhi stated that even before this mess, the guy had never shown any interest in her, and a childhood engagement was just child's play. Then her grandma reminded her that Ning Bay was raised in tough northern territory and had seen a lot, so expecting him to wax poetic about love and be all romantically mushy was a bit much. After hearing that, Chinhi finally realized she had acted a bit foolishly, but now it was impossible to dwell on that since the situation was set in stone. Morning rolled in, meaning it was time to hit the university, but the new day did not ease the weight of yesterday's shenanigans. So our hero was feeling exceptionally blue and frustrated. When he walked into his office, Ian was there waiting for him, greeting him with a big "Hello, Mr. Genius." Spotting the freshly brewed tea on the table, the young man was taken aback and asked if she made it. Ta got flustered, saying that Jiaoan was the one who brewed the tea. He waited a whole 2 hours, but lost his cool in the end, so her brother took off to play. Frowning, Ning Bay tried to figure out what prompted the guy to bother helping him, but Yusin switched gears, wanting to chat about whether he could hook the Tan Corporation up with an anti-gravity gadget. There was no emotion on his face when he replied he'd do it if the girl could provide one solid reason to help. Crossing her arms, Yuching said it was all because another martial artist crashed the Tang family party last night, and he was 2 years younger than Zhao Yun. Our hero quickly put 2 and 2 together. Realizing this jeopardized the guy's standing within the Tan family, the girl continued explaining that their family had strict bylaws and the heir was determined through a competition. So, if Xiao Yun got knocked out, he'd be shipped off to work for the company. Ning Bay mused that wasn't a bad outcome since the boy's carefree character would suit him better than being the family head. But Yusin argued it was more complicated than that, because if her brother lost his heir status, her 2 subpar uncles who were nothing but trouble would seize control of the Tan family, and Yuching herself could easily become a mere pawn in a political marriage. She was cringing at the thought of who she might end up married to. Ning Bay felt sorry for her. Doesn't he get how cutthroat big families are? After those words, he was thrown back to that horrible day when his parents and he as a little kid ran through the rain escaping armed relatives. Yeah, he knew all too well how ruthless rich folks could be in their hunger for power, so he decided to lend Yuxin and her brother a hand. This decision made the young lady so ecstatic that she jumped up and down. Flipping through something on his phone, our hero added that things weren't as simple as they seemed at first glance. Showing her the blocked messages, he said that getting involved in the anti-gravity project was a chore, and even he got booted from it. This revelation left the girl with her jaw on the floor. She was at a total loss about what to do next. Meanwhile, the lab techs led by Professor Lee were showcasing their project, bombarded with questions from colleagues wondering if they actually had a workable anti-gravity device. Getting into the anti-gravity project was tougher than an all-you-can-eat buffet line on a Saturday afternoon, and even he ended up getting booted out. This shocking news made the girl's jaw drop. She was at a complete loss for what to do next. Meanwhile, the lab techs, led by Professor Lee, were showcasing their project, while colleagues bombarded them with questions like they were on a quiz show, trying to figure out if they'd actually cracked the code for a complete anti-gravity device. A grinning Hu Chong declared that they had officially passed the tests, and besides their teacher, there were 8 other students in the lab, making a grand total of 9 folks getting their science on. But when Professor Lee was put on the spot and asked a few questions, he suddenly found his shoelaces very interesting and gulped nervously. It dawned on him that they'd really stepped in it. Still, he boldly proclaimed they were the masterminds behind the world's first anti-gravity contraption capable of levitating up to 10 meters high. The crowd erupted in applause, calling it a legit scientific breakthrough, which was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd poured 10 years of their life into this. The professor and his lab team were so caught up in their victory that they completely overlooked Mushi, who bluntly asked if they had truly created the device. This surprise blonde bombshell of a question threw Lee for a loop. He was visibly sweating bullets and struggling to find the right words to wiggle out of the hot seat. Hu Chong shot up from his chair and reminded her that the genius had sacrificed 10 whole years to conjure this thing. So, she totally had no right to question such brilliance. Out of nowhere, the classroom door flung open and an angry Yugji stormed in yelling for Kikon. Right behind her, Ning Bay entered, looming like an ominous shadow as the girl demanded the speaker to repeat himself. As the boy strolled toward the table of professors, whispers filled the room, speculating about the chaos unfolding. Hukong demanded that the guards escort Tang Yuing, who wasn't even supposed to be in the building, out of there. But no one dared touch the girl, who stood defiantly in the middle of the hall, stubbornly refusing to budge. Mushi, sitting nearby, smirked and asked why Professor Chong was so riled up. Was he worried about his secrets getting out? With a frown, the professor suggested the mistress was simply holding a grudge because they turned down her funding, and now she had resorted to spreading fibs. She was fuming at this accusation, since not only was she being called a liar, but it was all coming from people trying to claim someone else's glory. One of the audience members leaned over to his boss, Director Shu, asking if they should keep working with these clowns. The director replied without missing a beat. Zhu Chong was cool with it, even though he was almost absolutely sure they weren't the brains behind the operation. Trying to salvage his reputation, Hu Chong demanded to know what evidence Mushi had that their lab had snatched someone else's ideas. Yusin piped up, declaring that evidence was moot, since the creator was right there in front of them. The crowd went wild. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that the innovative genius was the young guy that girl had pointed at. Shu Chong Yi approached, grinning, and asked if the man before him was Mr. Ning, the youngest professor at the university. When our hero peered closer, he recognized a familiar face he was thrilled to see. It was mutual, as the man greeted him with a warm smile that radiated sincerity. But warm greetings could wait. Right now, it was crucial to mention that the anti-gravity device had been rigged with temporary spare parts. So, according to Ning Bay, after 5 experiments, the contraption was a goner, but Chong thought that was nonsense. They had completed 7 experiments that very night. To really scare his rival, our hero unleashed his overwhelming aura and asked if the man was certain everything was all right. Now Tian wasn't so sure anymore, sensing deep down that something was off. To back this up, the professor dashed over to the machine, flipped the switch, and urged a grinning Bay to watch closely. The machine roared to life, glowing and making a glorious racket. The audience was in awe, having never witnessed anything like it before. Zhu Chungi thought he was looking at a genuine scientific marvel, a breakthrough in anti-gravity research that could catapult the whole aerospace industry. As the machine floated an object defying gravity's grip, Kun triumphantly asked if his opponent was feeling a bit let down since the device was running like a dream. Except Professor Lee was starting to suspect Ning Bay was spot on because one critical detail had him on edge. As if reading Lee's mind, the guy pointed out that the crucial components were rapidly running low. You could tell because the machine was cranking up the noise to 11. It was pure truth. Not only was it getting louder, but it was also starting to crackle ominously. Lee realized he had the choice: either shut the device down right now or something catastrophic would unfold, something that could obliterate his career for good. He was desperate to avert disaster, but inside, he knew he had already been outmatched by this young gun long ago. It was clear to Ning Bay that it was too late to save the day, so he instructed the guests to stay as far from the invention as possible. Just seconds later, the contraption crashed to the floor with a clatter, nearly squashing Hu Kyung, who narrowly dodged it at the last second. While everyone came back to their senses, a voice rang out from the hall, calling out to Professor Lee expectantly. It was Xu Xingyi, who believed that since the man was the brain behind this marvel. Just as everyone was regaining their senses, a voice rang out from the hall, calling for Professor Lee like a kid at a candy store. It was Xu Xingyi, convinced that since a dude made such a miracle happen, he had to be the real deal. He should know why it's being blown to bits. Mr. Lee was so taken aback by this question that it knocked the wind out of him. He couldn't even string a sentence together. Meanwhile, Hu Chong decided to take charge of this circus. He dashed over to the machine and declared he would fix it just like that. He plopped down next to it for nearly an hour, tapping away with some mysterious tool like a mad scientist. The lab tech was clearly doing everything in his power to save face, but no matter how much he struggled, he couldn't even get the thing to budge. Seon was totally lost and was rolling his eyes when Shu Chongyi quipped if the genius who made this contraption had forgotten how to take it apart. The professor and his colleagues stayed silent until one lab assistant standing in the shadows decided to spill the tea. She admitted that in reality Professor Ning designed and built that anti-gravity device, and last night they couldn't even decipher its blueprints. Upon hearing this shocking revelation, the guests were flabbergasted by the audacity of these so-called scientists. Kung Feng, the Eastern Institute rep, threw shade and declared these professors were a disgrace to the academic world. His colleagues nodded in agreement. They jumped up from their seats and hightailed it out of the auditorium, not wanting to get involved in this nonsense. When Kung Feng saw Ning Bay walking out too, he sprinted over and asked him to hold up. This gentleman dangled a sweet offer of a professorship in front of our hero and promised research funds. He could even put together a dream team of assistants. Their conversation hit a wall when Chunggi approached. He had caught wind of the offer and thought it was pretty appealing, but he pointed out that his research department had more than 300 folks, all of whom dreamed of being sidekicks to such a brilliant scientist. Instead of responding, the guy just waved over his assistant Mushi to explain further. A stunning woman in a sharp outfit told the guys that Mr. Ning Bay certainly wasn't hurting for cash, so he wouldn't fall for their tricks. Bowing to her boss, she informed them that she alone had the honor of managing the whopping $290 billion in working capital owned by Ning Bay. The guy just sighed and shrugged, sounding like he didn't care. But for his two new buddies, it was a whole different story. Attitudes towards billionaires tend to shift quite dramatically. Even so, Mr. Shu Chungyi said that his company Chinhi Manufacturing was eager to partner with Bay. Our hero stared at him blankly and said he could talk to Mushi about it because she would be in charge of this venture moving forward. The investor types started showering Ning Bay with thanks for the opportunity and were already deep in conversation with his representative. Shortly after BA was approached by Yuxin, who praised his excellent work and asked if he could lend her a hand right now. Finally, a bright smile broke out on the young man's face as he promised to help out his friend. Yuxin jumped with joy, snatching her phone to tell her family the good news. However, the moment she unlocked her screen, she froze like a deer in headlights. It was clear she had stumbled upon something unpleasant. Ning Bay didn't miss her worried expression and immediately asked what was up. Yukin's face morphed into a confused mask as she claimed everything was peachy. Then she dialed her father and informed him that she had worked things out. Family had Tang confirmed that his people would reach out later. She was pretty bummed that after all her efforts, she'd still have to hand this case over to someone else. Ning Bay was keeping an eagle eye on her reactions and deduced some things from it. That's when he snatched the phone from her hand and told her father what she couldn't say herself. He informed Mr. Tan that Yusin would take over the research lab period. The man on the line was outraged, demanding what right he had to meddle in their family business. Our hero calmly said he was a friend of Yusin and Xiao Yun, so if anyone stepped on their toes, he'd gladly kick that person out of Dragon City. The girl couldn't believe this grumpy guy who claimed to be their friend stood up for her. Now she thought of him as more than just a good buddy. After thanking him, she wanted to say more, but Xiao Yun, looking a little too happy for the situation, bounded over. Spotting his sister's red eyes, he started poking around to see what was wrong. He even jumped to the conclusion that Ning Bay had hurt Yusing's feelings, but after grilling him about it, the guy realized he had probably said something pretty foolish. She playfully punched her brother's shoulder and told him to mind his own business, especially since she wasn't a kid anymore. It was high time he stopped hovering around her. Mushi, who had just joined them, clarified that it wasn't her boss who upset the girl, but the head of the Tang family. This news sent Xiao into a rage. He remarked that this old man had lost his marbles since he was always stirring up trouble. To divert her brother's attention, the girl reminded him that he wanted to ask Ning Bay to teach him. After bowing, the boy told Bay he wanted to learn martial arts from him. The latter chuckled, saying that bowing wasn't necessary since they were the same age. Our hero agreed to train his buddy. He had lost his marbles since he was always stirring up trouble. To distract her brother from such thoughts, the girl reminded him that he wanted to ask Ning Bay to be his teacher. after bowing. The boy informed Bay that he would like to learn martial arts from him. The latter replied that bowing was unnecessary since they were the same age. Our hero agreed to tutor his friend, so he told him to swing by whenever he had a moment to breathe. Just like his sister Josh bounced up in happiness and gave the guy a big thumbs up for the favor. The day was winding down and the exhausted sun was checking out beyond the horizon. But the traffic around the university was like a never-ending party. Instead, it only got crazier as vehicles loaded with super important stuff rolled in. This chaotic operation was led by Shu Chong-yi, who was so dedicated that he couldn't trust anyone else with a job this big. Yusin joined the party asking everyone to chill and not rush. When she showed up, the guy greeted her with a big old smile and announced that for now they'd set up a temporary research lab to wrangle everyone for the upcoming shenanigans. Their friendly banter got interrupted with someone insisting they should take it easy and not be in such a hurry. They turned around to find Ning Bay, who figured there was absolutely no need to keep searching since they already had a pretty sweet lab right there. But Mr. Doctor Chungi disagreed, asserting that a real research institute would be much more fitting for their needs. A gentleman who wandered up to the group piped in saying that wasn't necessary. He claimed he had groomed some really sharp assistants for the new research lab. Chang Jiji instantly recognized him as a military guy with some clout. Director Scene introduced him by the name P Gang. This fella hailed from the research lab at the University of Aeronautical Engineering and was no stranger to Ning Bay, the youngest professor in the history of the university, who had made the world's first anti-gravity gadget. He reached out his hand for a handshake, but Bay just stared at it like it was a strange alien appendage and didn't budge. Not one to get fazed by this snub, Peng announced that he brought along the creme de la creme of scholars and they'd naturally take the lead role, the honorary one he was more than willing to fill. Plus, he was ready to foot all research costs, with bonuses to boot for any brilliant discoveries. He flashed a gold card at the kid claiming it had 10 million bucks inside for his anti-gravity project. With a bored glance at Pagon, our protagonist casually remarked that everyone could stay, but he wanted to send the money packing back home. The guy was totally baffled, asking why the kid would turn that down, and the response was that the sum was just too paltry to do anything substantial. Flustered, the man stammered that he couldn't take the cash back since it was given to Mr. Nin from the top brass. Bay explained how he'd been cushioned by high-ranking folks since he jumped into the Bolivian Military Academy at 7. This revelation was clearly news to the man who had no clue about those details. According to Ning Bay, that's why he wasn't interested in the reward, even though he appreciated the backing. He turned and strolled away, leaving the confused fellow to fumble with the gold card solo. Trying to ease the situation, the university director remarked that this is just how this young genius rolled. After exiting the building, Pang informed Mr. Xiao that the situation was handled, but added that the kid wasn't interested in any cash. He also suggested this tricky character could potentially become their ally. The bosses instructed the man to dig deeper and take immediate action, but he insisted on more intel because he couldn't strategize without knowing anything about the guy, especially since even the higher-ups were drawing blanks on him. The system kept spitting out that the files on him were top secret, so they were left to speculate who this mysterious dude really was. Meanwhile, the lab was buzzing with activity. People were stacking boxes with equipment while Ning Bay was trying to figure out how to arrange everything for maximum convenience. Somehow, Yusin got wind that someone had snuck a phone into the lab, so she yelled that it was strictly off limits. But when she discovered it was Ning Bay with the mobile, she sighed in disappointment, muttering that he was the only one she couldn't boss around. While the guy was busy taking an urgent call, Yusin was busy barking orders and making sure nobody got sidetracked. On the phone, BA learned that someone was snooping around for info about him. Apparently, it was about a certain Zhao Jingyi. This intel was not cool and immediately put our hero on high alert. His eyes landed on a dude casually strolling by, acting suspiciously, as if he wanted to eavesdrop on the chat. That's when Bay casually reassured himself that there was no need to fret over spying. This person turned out to be Pei Gang. So, the guy boldly approached him and inquired if the intel he managed to gather was legit. The question totally threw the guy for a loop. He couldn't comprehend how his undercover mission got out so fast. He awkwardly tried to squirm his way out, explaining he meant no harm. His whole plan was just to get to know the guy he was about to work with better. Bay didn't buy it, saying that if the dude wanted to know something about him, he should have come up and asked him directly instead of sneaking around gathering intel through some Zhao Jingyi. That wrapped up their conversation, but as he glanced at Ning Bay, Pang suddenly realized that this guy's fingers could reach everywhere. After a bit, the shiny new anti-gravity device was all set. After a quick inspection, Ning Bay announced that everything was good to go, which meant testing could kick off. Pulling the lever, everyone zeroed in on the machine, which lit up with a soft pink glow. Just a few seconds later, the device zapped into the air, defying the laws of gravity and making scientists jump for joy. Gong was so sure this mission was destined for success that he was ready to throw down $10 billion. But Ning Bay didn't need a dime since the Tang Corporation was covering all the research costs. As Yuking, his sidekick, confirmed, the guy started buttering him up, claiming he could score even more backing for upcoming projects. He reiterated that he didn't need cash from the War Ministry, but promised to share the lab's technology instantly. Mr. Peigang was taken aback by such generosity that a twinge of embarrassment washed over him. The guy quipped, even crows understand gratitude, so he vowed to defend his country for life, no strings attached. Those words left Mr. Peigang saluting, because words weren't necessary at that moment. Ning Bei and Yu Qing only left the campus when the sun had set. The girls suggested they grab some dinner. Just then, Xiaoan sprinted up to them, equally concerned about his sister and pal starving after a long day. So they all headed to the Gold Cup restaurant together. Hound picked this spot because he had never been there before, but heard the food was top-notch. They were swiftly greeted by a doorman who inquired if they had a VIP card. After a second of contemplating, Xiao Yun admitted he had no clue this place required one. The doorman flashed a smile and informed them that in that case, they couldn't slip in through the main door. That news set Xiao Yun off, who was furious at this treatment of customers. And the restaurant employee simply shrugged, stating that was just how the cookie crumbles. A couple strolled up, a hefty fellow and a stunning lady. The wealthy guy didn't even acknowledge the doorman, instead barking an order to park his car. And surprisingly, the employee jumped to it like a loyal pup. So the guys could only watch in frustration, as these VIPs were treated like royalty. Yukin said they should find another place and save their sanity. But her brother was determined to confront this snobbery against everyday folks. Spotting them, the rich man laughed dismissively, stating students like them had no business in such posh places. When he turned his attention to Yu Xin, he grasped her chin, leering that she was so pretty she could stay and keep him entertained for the night. Zhao Yan had none of that. He shouldered in and shoved that gross perv aside, telling him to get lost before he could say, "Money's no object." The rich man's face turned crimson with rage that some lowly student dared to even touch him. Tossing a wad of cash at the guy, he barked to go eat at some dive and stop getting in his way. Oh, brother Yusing was just waiting for the prime moment to unleash his pent-up fury. Now it had arrived, but the doorman stepped in just in time, warning them to scram because this man was a VIP, and they should be seen and not heard. Now Ning Bei was also getting riled up. Cold fury had him muttering that the rich dude could keep his money. He'd need it soon for hospital bills. The rich man didn't get the hint right away, so he didn't rush to respond. Turning to Xiao Yun, Ning Bei told him to take note. If anyone touched Yusing, that hand would be lopped off. This battle cry resonated with the girl's brother, so he readied himself to heed his mentor's advice. The startled VIP squeaked, clearly terrified about what might come next. But before he could process, he got a bone-crunching jab from Xiao Yun that shattered his arm like a twig. The rich man howled in agony. He had never felt such pain in his spoiled life. Down on his knees, he wailed about being murdered. His companion and the doorman were at a complete loss on how to aid him. Turning to his buddies, Ning Bei declared they should bail from this dump that clearly didn't value its patrons. The ruckus drew the attention of a lady who emerged from the establishment demanding to know what was going on. It was Ah Chao, the restaurant owner, with her assistant Lu Xuan trailing behind. She was keen to find out who was causing a ruckus in her turf. Spotting the landlady, Boj whined that these guys had broken his arm and called for her to deal with them. Grinning, she cocked her head to Lushwan and ordered him to handle these troublemakers. But Zhao Yun protested, saying this man was the first to make a pass at his sister. And if words weren't enough, they could always check the footage. Glancing at his boss, Luan suggested they should actually review the tapes to figure out who was to blame. This idea struck the woman as absurd, and she smirked, stating that with his skills, this man could only be a security guard. She explained that the boss was their honored guest who got roughed up, so as a mark of respect, they should take his word for it and skip the camera checks. Even though the man was clearly biting his tongue about her call, she commanded him to follow orders immediately and deal with the students. The agitated Xiao Yun turned to his mentor and asked what their next move was. Ning Bay replied nonchalantly that they were about to face off, so they knew what had to be done. They had to fight because that was the only way to stand their ground. Determined to show off their honor and prove they were right, his buddy unclenched his fists and declared he'd try his best to teach these miscreants a lesson about not dividing folks into classes. The guard told the young man to step aside, claiming he didn't want to pummel someone so young. He was ready to take on the next opponent, but nobody gave this gentleman the right to pick his battles. That's when Yuxin came charging in, telling the guy to stop with the ridiculous talk. In that moment, the guard realized this kid was no ordinary fighter. He had some serious fighting chops based on the vibe he was giving off. These thoughts distracted him from the fight at hand, so he barely had time to block the massive hit aimed at his upper body. The impact jolted him back a few steps, giving his opponent a chance to show off his fancy footwork. The rest of the restaurant staff were absolutely appalled that this little kid dared to go after Xuan, sensing his friends wanted to jump in. The man ordered them to stay put because none of them were a match for this young whippersnapper. Those words ignited a fire in Chow. She couldn't fathom how a retired soldier could fear a mere child. What she didn't grasp was that the student before them was anything but average. He was a martial arts master. When the staff and owner of the restaurant clued in, they went wide-eyed in surprise. With a frown directed at the guard, Ning Bay remarked that soldiers should be ashamed to turn into mere puppets for the rich. Those words stung because the man had once been a soldier respected and proud, but now the kid's words held a hint of truth. Then another guy emerged from the restaurant and ordered everyone to settle down, making it clear that this nonsense had to stop. It was Han Li from the Dragon City squad. The madame felt confident he'd back her up and sort things out with the students. But she was floored when he knelt before Ning Bay and greeted him as the king of the north. At that, both the restaurant owner and her well-heeled customer were left speechless. Even so, the man declared he couldn't overlook the trouble he had endured. That's when a wolf from the eastern capital, Xiao Dong, approached him, asking what the VIP was planning to do. Not getting an answer, the blonde guy strode over to Ning Bay to catch up after a long while. He also greeted the fellow from the Dragon City squad, who clearly recognized the wolf from the eastern capital. Facing the astonished rich guy, the blonde commented that this was his turf too, so he should clean up his mess. To oversee the whole ordeal, the squad member who the madame had pinned her hopes on had decided to step up, but now the situation had turned upside down. Spotting the shine of a sword blade, Miss Chao could only gasp in terror and back away. Yet Ning Bei urged his friend not to frighten these people too much, since they were already teetering on the edge of losing their reputation. Our hero believed that a broken arm would serve as a fair lesson to watch one's mouth, since the repercussions could catch up really fast. After that, the boys strolled away, chatting about family and what had recently happened. Once the esteemed guests left the restaurant, hostess seized the chance to weasel out of the crisis by declaring that they had no clue who they were up against. Turning to the panicked woman, the squad member assured her that the Northern King wouldn't stir up trouble with them, so she could do what she felt was right. The woman opted to shut down her business. Our hero and his friend had already put a good distance between themselves and the restaurant when suddenly across the horizon a wounded soldier appeared, barely able to move his legs. The squad member immediately recognized him. It was Fubo, looking like he'd seen better days after taking a serious hit. Gathering his strength, the injured man reported that a wanted criminal had shown up. He'd stumbled into him while trying to apprehend him and nearly met his maker. Helping the guy to his feet, the warrior urged him to get inside for some medical attention. Once Fubo received first aid and had his wounds wrapped, his friend asked who he had tangled with. The chat was cut short when the lady interrupted, stating she had instructed the guards to close the doors and keep everyone out. After catching his breath, the injured man informed them that a dude named Gang Bao had inflicted those wounds. Everybody knew he was an assassin with warrior-level skills in the city. Only Commander Xiao could rein him in. Just as a squad member began punching in a number on his phone, the atmosphere tensed as someone started banging on the door. All their worst fears came to light. It was the same criminal who almost put Fubo 6 feet under. Gangbao kicked the door down like he was auditioning for a villain role and sauntered in uninvited. But that didn't faze him. He felt like he was the king of this mess. The warrior reminded the criminal that he'd already reported him to his commanding officer. This was the robber's golden ticket to make himself scarce. With a cheeky grin, the criminal said he still had time to take out a few squad members before he made his escape. It was clear this rogue wasn't planning to leave without a fight, so the team decided they needed to hold him until they got orders. But detaining him wasn't going to be easy, as he was packing a powerful punch. Noticing his buddy needed a hand, Fubo sprang to his feet, seized his sword, and told Han to back off while he took on the enemy. But his friend scoffed, arguing only cowards would pull stunts like that because there were no such things as dragons. A fighter's taking off faster than a kid running from a broccoli dish. While the squad was stuck in this snooze fest of a chat, their foes were busy throwing punches like they were having a sale on fists. Meanwhile, the two warriors hit the ground like they just paid their tab. The outlaw had the nerve to declare that today, the guys from Dragon City were getting a one-way ticket to a gruesome ending. But wait, out of nowhere, a hero appeared claiming no decent folks were going down today. Yup, it was Ning Bay. He caught wind of the ruckus at the restaurant and swung by to check it out firsthand. Fubo, the floor mat of a warrior, mumbled that he didn't know the guy, but on a purely human level, he suggested hightailing it out of there since the killer was packing some serious warrior-level heat. As the troublemaker sauntered over, he couldn't help but ask if the guy thought he could escape his grasp. Staying here? That was like signing his own death certificate, but our hero wasn't shaking in his boots. He dodged that first swing like a pro, leaving his opponent stunned and slack-jawed. Ning Bay reminded his foe of the ancient wisdom dropping your sword in a fight is basically signing up for a VIP seat at the death show. Those who were watching were in for a treat. They'd never seen someone dance around a foe with such finesse before. Now even the outlaw and his buddies were wondering who this guy was. Han recognized the North's commander standing in front of them, but had no clue about his real power. When the outlaw demanded to know who he was, Ning said casually, "Just your friendly neighborhood king of the North." After that, he launched into some moves so slick that his enemy didn't stand a chance to counter. Fubo was flabbergasted that this high-level warrior bit the dust before he could even blink at the kid's attacks. Handing the sword back, our hero said it was a nice piece of work and advised the warrior not to misplace it again. Just then, Xiao Yun strolled in, nonchalantly waving at Ning Bay like he hadn't just walked into a crime scene. But when he spotted the bloody mess on the floor, it almost brought up his breakfast. He rushed to his sister, grabbed her hand, and urged her not to peek into the room. Yukin was confused and asked what the deal was, but she got zero answers because her brother lost his lunch right on the floor. The rest of the gang instantly bombarded Ning Bay with questions. He explained, lacking any enthusiasm, that he was just lending a hand with the killer. At long last, after their wild roller coaster ride of adventures, our heroes made their way to the Tang family abode. Their host, all smiles, set the table and invited the boys to dig into her culinary masterpieces, which looked and smelled absolutely heavenly. They had every dish you could think of, except poor Xiao Yun was still reeling from what he had just seen. When he looked at that glorious spread, his stomach turned. To avoid hurting his sister's feelings, he insisted he wasn't hungry. Watching his mentor chow down like it was just another Tuesday, the kid asked how he could eat after all that, to which he replied, "You gotta get used to it, buddy." Our hero remembered his buddy mentioning joining up with Dragon City's forces, and he nodded in agreement. Bay then noted that they usually don't recruit rich kids because they're afraid they'll use their privilege for personal gain. According to him, what they witnessed today was just another Tuesday in the life of a warrior from the city defense group. After saying that, Zhao Yan decided it might be time for a serious game plan overhaul. But before they could continue, Mama Bear walked into the dining room asking her daughter if there was a guest she had no idea about. The girl beamed and introduced Ning Bay, adding that he was their brand new friend. The name Ning rang a bell for the woman. She knew a person named Hawal, the strongest dude from the third generation of the 7 prime families. The mere mention of this guy made our hero cringe, so he thanked her for the hospitality and said it was time to skedaddle. Yuchin was bummed out because her friend hadn't even touched the food. She offered to ask the chef to whip up something else if he wasn't a fan. Just then, Dad barged into the dining room, eager to see which lucky fella his daughter, who was stingy with bringing home boyfriends, had trot out. The girl was utterly caught off guard by this assumption and quickly insisted that Dad had it all wrong. Her brother jumped in, declaring that Ning Bay was in fact deserving of her sister, which earned him a punch right in the kisser, since that guy was Chinhi's fiancé. Now the dad finally put two and two together and realized he was the eldest son of the Ning family, the one whose engagement Sue had ended, and he was the same guy who had put the scare into Mr. Tan earlier on that day. But our hero was quick to clarify that he wasn't making any threats. He was just bringing some attention to the situation. Mr. Tan recalled the part about booting their family out of Dragon City. Once he vented his frustrations, Ning Bay casually mentioned that as long as Yu Xing's achievements remained intact, that wouldn't come to pass. But Mr. Tang was having none of it. He held firm that no one had the right to meddle in their family matters. Zhao Yun stepped in, backing his buddy and saying that his dad was overreacting and giving Yu Qing a hard time. But Yu Qin promptly hissed at her brother to stop escalating things. This little spat got interrupted when Mama Bear addressed Ning Bay, telling him that if he wanted to be Yu Qin's boyfriend, he might want to know who she really was first. After sizing up the woman, our hero shot back with that they didn't seem to know who was sitting right in front of them either. "Oh, and this guy is our new buddy," she added cheerfully. The last name Ning sounded familiar to her, like that hit song, "You Can't Get Out of Your Head." She remembered a guy named Hawal, the toughest cookie in the third generation of the 7 great families. His name sent a shiver down our hero's spine, so he thanked her for the warm welcome and said it was about time he hit the road. This man rubbed our hero the wrong way, so he thanked her for the hospitality and said it was high time for him to bounce. Yuchin got all bummed out since her friend hadn't even taken a bite. She was like if he didn't enjoy the food. Just then, her dad popped into the dining room, all excited to see the guy his daughter, who rarely brought boyfriends home, had managed to drag in. The girl was utterly floored by this assumption and immediately began to correct her dad, insisting he had it all wrong. Her brother jumped in, saying that no matter what, Ning Bay was definitely good enough for her sister. Of course, he got a fist to the face for that one, considering the guy was Chinhi's fiancé. Finally, the family patriarch figured it out. He was the eldest son of the Ning family that Sue had dumped. And this was the same dude who'd threatened Mr. Tan over the phone today. But our hero defended himself, saying there were no threats, just some good old information sharing. The man recollected Ning Bay's comment about giving their family a one-way ticket out of Dragon City. After listening to Mr. Tan venting, Ning Bay casually remarked that as long as Yu Xing didn't lose her achievements, things would be just peachy. But Mr. Tan was losing his cool. He believed nobody had the right to meddle in their family dramas. Zhao Yun jumped in to support his buddy, claiming his father was overreacting and downright bullying Yu Qing. But the girl shot a warning look at her brother to keep his mouth shut. Just then, Mama Bear interrupted, addressing Ning Bay and making it clear that if he wanted to be Yuxin's boyfriend, he better know who he was dealing with. After giving the woman a once-over, our hero shot back that they didn't seem to realize who was sitting in front of them either. Mr. Tang confidently declared they were in the know about everything. After all, in front of them was just the neglected son of the Ning family. These words sent Zhao Yun into a rage. He desperately tried to inform his dad that Ning Bay had already returned home to his family. Seeing the disbelief on his face, our hero exclaimed that if he couldn't trust his own son, he should check it out himself. The master peered closely at the handkerchief and asked, baffled, why he had received this. Ning Bay casually replied that the Tang family had some impressive connections that could help him untangle this mystery, but the young man advised the gentleman to tread carefully. The head of the house couldn't wrap his head around why the kid was threatening him once again. A flurry of thoughts swirled in his mind about what this shawl could imply. The man examined the black cloth adorned with a golden dragon to verify his hunch. My father called his uncle to inquire about Shaw, only to be informed he must be out of his mind for contacting someone who owned such items. He was warned never to mess with the owner of this handkerchief. Uncle Yun himself would drop to his knees when he met this person, shaking. The man asked who this owner might be. He was told that all 5 major warlords, his minions, were eavesdropping on this captivating tale. Our hero couldn't hide his grin. He genuinely enjoyed seeing the bewildered expressions on his opponents' faces, especially when Mr. Tang's phone slipped from his fingers and his whole body started shaking. With a smirk, the kid sweetened his tone and asked if the gentleman recognized him. The guy reiterated again that he and Yusin were just buddies. She had invited him over for some tasty treats, and that was all there was to it. After that, he handed his friend some card. As she examined the pretty card, the girl asked him, "What does this mean?" With a warm smile, the young man assured her that no one would dare to push around the card's owner. Mr. Tang's first request was for his daughter to snap a picture of the card because he was eager to ask Uncle Yun, "What's up with this?" Chuckling awkwardly, Zhao Yun reassured them that Ning Bay was just a really tough guy. Hearing this, the head of the house couldn't help but say his son was a total numbskull for thinking so. Glancing around, the boys exchanged puzzled looks, trying to figure out who their friend really was. Eventually, my father reached his uncle, who looked at the picture. Chuckling awkwardly, Xiao Yun said there was no reason to worry about Ning Bei because he was just a big, tough warrior. Hearing that the head of the household remarked that his son was a total fool if he genuinely believed that, the guys exchanged glances, trying to piece together who their friend really was. He was just being a complete nitwit. The boys glanced around, trying to figure out who their friend really was. Finally, my dad managed to get in touch with my uncle, who took a look at the photo and said they were lucky to have this guy's protection because from now on, nobody in the 3 central provinces would dare touch them. Now the whole family hounded Uncle for clearer info on who Ning Bei truly was. The man told them there were basically 2 types of these cards. One was for offing people, and the other was for defense. If someone had a protection order, the entire northern garrison was on guard for that person. No one in the universe would dare to mess with him. The head of the house finally realized he needed to thank Ning Bei for this generous gift. So he decided to gather up the generous gifts the next day and head over to apologize to his family. Despite the late hour, lights still flickered in the Ning family's estate. As it turned out, they had Chinhi over as a guest who was dying to see her ex-fiancé, but he had been MIA for ages. After loitering for what felt like forever, the girl figured it was time to bail since it was getting late. All this time, Ning Bei was chilling on the roof of the house. From up there, he watched the person who had been hollering about wanting to break free from him finally leave. He stealthily approached his mother, who nearly yelped when she realized she wasn't alone on the street. Quick to collect herself, she commanded her son to hurry after Chinhi and talk to her. The father finally connected the dots when he saw a picture, and it nearly made him scream in fear when he realized he wasn't alone on the street. Quickly sobering up, she ordered her son to hurry and catch up with Chinhi for a chat. But the guy shot back that there was no point in chatting since they had already hashed everything out. When he sensed his mother was about to protest, he declared he was super beat and desired to hit the hay soon. Just as quietly and unnoticed, Han approached him and dropped the bomb that something had gone down with the Xiao family. This news threw our hero for a loop, as he had just heard that Xiao Dong returned not long ago. He decided to check out the mansion and see for himself, but when he stepped inside, he was met with a gruesome scene of many mangled bodies. Approaching, Xiao Shan, the young man, queried what happened here, as it resembled a slaughterhouse. The warrior, tears welling in his eyes, recounted how he tried to stop Wolf Dune from pulling some stunt, but he couldn't. Ning Bei suggested they go inside the house to chat. Inside, there sat a girl, quaking in fear, wrapped in a blanket, trying to gather herself after the chaos. Her parents were doing their best to soothe her, but even they were stunned by how furious their tormentors had been. Upon seeing Yen in this state, Ning Bei felt truly terrified for the first time in ages. When she spotted her brother in the place, she sprinted toward him, tears streaming down her cheeks, looking just like little Gogo when he first laid eyes on her after the bandit raid. Kneeling down, the boy urged Yunin to spill the beans on what had unfolded. Covering her face with her hands, she began to cry. He could barely decipher what she was saying. All he caught was that her tormentors had been making a real shame of her on her own special day. This revelation hit our hero like a ton of bricks, igniting a fury within him that he had never known before. He demanded to know who the villains were. Xiao Yun Shan spilled the beans that it was Taiba from the Western District. Jumping up like a coffee-fueled squirrel, the lad asked to pass along an order from the King of the North. The plan to seal off the city all night long. He was itching to make everyone who took a swing at them wish they hadn't, and his revenge was going to be more epic than a blockbuster. Meanwhile, Chao Dong rolled into the manor and instantly spotted the northern commander. He pleaded with his brother to let him through, and Ning Bay replied, "Hey, I'm not here to stop anyone." I mean, Jun was also his sister, and the one who messed with a close henchman of the King of the North had it coming, cruelest death, and all that jazz. Meanwhile, the city was buzzing like a beehive. All the nightclubs were alive and kicking, welcoming party animals looking for a good time. Among these merrymakers were Ning Bay and Chao Dong, except their idea of fun was a little twisted since they could only kick back after seeing their foes get what's coming to them. The guards at the entrance spotted them right away. It was clear those two weren't there for karaoke. But when our hero flexed his strong, overwhelming vibe, the guard clammed up faster than a clam at high tide. Today, B.A. wasn't in the mood for chit-chat, so he opted for a more hands-on approach to negotiating. So he simply flung the pesky guard against the wall. This move sent shivers down the spines of everyone waiting in line. They were left scratching their heads, wondering how a huge guard could go flying from such a light jab. Just as they were about to waltz into the club, Xiao Yun Shan caught up with them, eager to join in on the chaos. The squad leader promised to get to the bottom of things faster than you can say revenge, but our hero had his own plans, so he booted the doors open and swaggered into the club, leaving the patrons totally baffled. The last person he expected to see there was his ex-fiancée, sitting alone at a table sipping her drink like it held the secret to the universe. She looked up and immediately caught Ning Bay grinning like a Cheshire cat. The girl scoffed, muttering that he still loved to show off his power. Sauntering over, the guy asked what she was doing there. Chinhi retorted sharply that it was none of his business. Snatching the glass from her reluctant grasp, Bay declared that once he sorted things out, he'd definitely be taking her home. The infuriated girl leapt up, swatted the glass out of his hands, stating that she hadn't asked him to babysit her, especially since they weren't tied together in any way, and he could think about her as much as he liked, sighing in annoyance. The guy coolly mentioned that he had already texted her family, so they would be swooping in for her soon. Strangely enough, this triggered a furious reaction. She began pummeling him with her fists, demanding to know why he even cared. But he wouldn't even engage her. Grabbing her arm, Ba snapped that it was downright risky for her to be out there solo. The guy went on about how she knew what happened to Shoung's sister, but instead of figuring out her own reckless behavior, Chinhi concluded that her ex-fiancé was still fretting over her. At that moment, our hero was at a loss for words. Some petty excitement seemed trivial against the serious stuff he wanted to share, while Chinhi remained blissfully oblivious to the lurking danger. But their convo was rudely interrupted by Xiao Yun Shan, who burst in with news that he'd tracked down the culprit who was messing with Habao. Barely holding in his rage, Xiong demanded to know where the scoundrel who'd hurt his sister was now. Noticing the conversation was interrupted when Xiao Yun Shan announced he had located the person who served Habao. Poor Xiaong barely held back his rage, demanding to know where the one who harmed his sister was hiding. His buddy was hanging by a thread. Ning Bay reminded him not to mess up his sword with the blood of good folks. But his friend was convinced the dude was no angel. Before long, they were approached by some shady men with bats who commanded them to scram. Inside, our hero had been simmering in a rage that needed an outlet. Now he decided to unleash it on these goons who dared to cross him. With just one swing, he knocked out the guy who crumpled to the floor of the club like a rag doll. After shutting his ex-fiancée's eyes gently, he informed her that the man had claimed 4 lives and thus was due for a one-way trip to the afterlife. Xia Yun Shan suddenly got a light bulb moment, realizing their northern king had memorized the files of every criminal, staring right at the counts of lives taken by his aura. Luckily, Chin hadn't actually witnessed the murder, so she was peppering him with questions about what he did and why everyone was screaming. But he told her to look away and avoid peeking in that direction. Just then, a dude sporting a sword tattoo came up from the crowd and asked who dared to stir the pot in his bar. This tattoo was instantly recognized by the squad leader. Yeah, and everyone else caught on that this guy was with the Black Sword Association. For our hero, that meant only one thing. Folks with that ink were mortal enemies of the King of the North. First thing on Ning Bay's agenda was finding a quiet spot to stash his ex-fiancée who, despite the chaos, seemed to be snoozing away. Once that was squared away, he was ready to dive back into the fray and settle the score with his arch-nemesis. The crowd caught wind that our guys understood the significance of the tattoo, So they began egging their leader on, claiming that if Bao Yai wanted, nobody would leave here alive. The Black Sword Association was the sworn enemy of the Northern Army, a potent force that still roamed free. But it was pretty clear that the man in front of him was just one of the lackeys of the more important members of the association, puffing his chest about his membership. But it was obvious that the man in front of him was just another lackey of the bigger fish in the association, bragging about his connection like he was at a college job fair. No matter how much Baoya threw a tantrum, Chaong stayed as cool as a cucumber, claiming the bar owner wasn't even worth his time. When he heard that Baoya couldn't help but snicker and throw back a cheeky question about who exactly was front and center dishing out such nonsense. Instead of replying like a normal person, Mr. Blonde whipped out his sword and suggested the association member should feel a little cold steel on his skin. Although the crowd groaned in disbelief, their leader took a step back, realizing he'd been put on notice as a member of the Black Sword Association. And the shiny blade the blonde guy was brandishing was none other than the sword of the King of the North. Glancing around, Xiao Yun Shan pondered whether he ought to jump in. After all, the association might have grand plans, but he sensed it was best not to stick around, since they were only dealing with some wannabe who was just an average Joe with nothing valuable. So he decided to let Chaong have at it, figuring he needed to blow off some steam anyway. Bao Ya felt an immense pressure that could flatten 1,000 guys. He quickly realized his opponent was no joke. He was at the God of War level. Understanding there was no escape, his only option was to square off. With a sly grin, the blonde remarked that the frightened look on Bao Ya's face was exactly what members of the Black Sword Association should exhibit. When the bar owner once again inquired who was in front of him, Ning Bay couldn't hold back any longer and blurted out that he was dealing with Chaong. That name was practically a headline in the area. Instantly, Bao Ya grasped how deep he was in trouble. He'd have to fight the legendary Wolf Dong. If Chaong took orders from the guy lounging behind the bar, the club owner could only shudder at who exactly that could be. As he lunged at Bao, the blonde yelled that this creep didn't need to know who was in front of him because he wasn't worth the effort. But just then, another warrior from the crew jumped in and said he needed to grab Bao right now. It was clear that Chaong was not thrilled by this turn of events. He was absolutely disgusted that his hands were practically tied. The first thing this new warrior did was greet the King of the North, but the blonde didn't even bother glancing over. When Ba heard this prestigious title being tossed around, he screamed in shock. There was no way he expected such a VIP to show up at his bar. He knew full well who this young powerhouse was, one who reached the war god level at a mere age of 9. The night he hit that milestone, a king-level figure crossed over and initiated a war just for him. He didn't even have a moment to think about how he'd ended up in such dire straits before getting his world rocked. The blonde man stood there dumbfounded, not having done anything to warrant such a reaction from his opponent. After checking out the lifeless body, Xiao Yun Shan proclaimed that he had scared the poor guy to death. The other warriors in his squad were so flabbergasted by this revelation that they began to feel a twinge of fear about the guy they were supposed. The dude who had just arrived a few minutes ago bowed out and claimed he had no reason to bother Mr. Ning Bay anymore. But our hero wasn't about to let him scurry away that easily. Activating his aura, he made the guy crumble down to his knees. Casting a sideways glance at the warrior, Ning Bay offered him some tea. The guy was so shaken he could barely refuse. His hands were trembling from fear. Then the blonde sauntered over and whispered that he should remember in the future that it's not his place to give orders, reminding him that it was the King of the North who wanted this man dead. But the chance had slipped through his fingers. Laughing nervously, the man insisted he only wanted to solve a tiny problem for his master. But this explanation didn't sit well with Chaong, who suspected the warrior had come to the city to snoop on his brother. Naturally, he started denying everything, but believing him would be about as smart as a rock, so trusting his gut, they tossed the suspic out. It was super fishy that yet another person with a status equal to the deputy chief of the Central China Group was suddenly in town. Everyone knew the story that Ning Bay came to Dragon City for a family reunion, but in reality, he was there to heal up. Outsiders had no clue just how serious the injury was. It seemed someone had a real uphill battle in bringing him back north in one piece. These revelations had the blonde man on edge, and he urged his brother to exercise caution. But our hero was all about keeping the northern border secure above all else. Just as they were deep into their chat, the front door of the club swung wide open, and in burst Chinhi's brother, frozen with a shout. When he saw the girls snoozing on one of the couches, he started accusing the guy of bringing her to such a scandalous place. Without a care in the world, he shrugged off Chinhi's relative, claiming they just happened to cross paths here. After that, our hero headed home. Stepping into his father's study, Bai noticed he was awake and asked why he hadn't hit the hay yet. Ning Kanland welcomed his son with a grin and said he had some important stuff to chat about, which was why he stayed up. Handing over a folder, his father said they needed to tackle one issue dealing with Hi's bloodline because he wanted his son to join the Ning Group's board of directors. Spotting some familiar names, our hero decided he'd tackle this tomorrow, since today had already been packed to the brim. Sleepily closing his eyes, the Lord advised his son not to be too drastic with it. After all, these folks had played a big part in building up the Ning Group. Now he just didn't want to clash with the family patriarch. So, in reality, he was there to recover. Outsiders didn't know how bad his injury really was. It seemed someone had taken a major hit on their way to get him back up north alive. This revelation set off alarms for the blonde guy who urged his brother to tread carefully, but our hero asserted that keeping the northern border safe was top priority. Just then, the club's front door swung open with a bang, and Chinhi's brother froze in place, shouting, "What is she doing here?" Spotting the girl snoozing on a couch, he started accusing the guy of dragging her into such a shady spot. With an indifferent flick of his wrist, he turned his back on Chinhi's bro, replying that their meetup was purely a coincidence. After that, our hero headed home like he was in an episode of a sitcom. Once inside his father's study, Bay noticed Dad was wide awake and asked why he wasn't resting yet. Ning Kanlan greeted his son with a smile, explaining he wanted to chat and didn't feel like catching Z's just yet. Handing his son a folder, Dad said they had a little situation to sort out regarding Hi's lineage because he wanted his son on the Ning Group board of directors. Scanning the familiar names in the folder, our hero decided he'd tackle that tomorrow since his plate was already full. Tired, he closed his eyes, and the Lord asked his son not to go in too hot about it. After all, those folks helped build the Ning Group, right? Not wanting to argue with the head of the family, the young man decided to give a sweet smile and nod in agreement with Dad. As soon as he turned away with heavy eyelids, he hustled out of the office and into his room. 2 days flew by since the recent chaos. Our hero was sprawled on the couch watching TV, marveling at how it was a fantastic way to alert regular folks about any issues. He got pulled from his thoughts when his mom strolled into the room with a tray announcing that if he hadn't eaten breakfast yet, he could try the red bean porridge. He wasn't that hungry, but to spare his mom's feelings, he took a couple of bites and pretended it was amazing. With a big grin, his mom said the culinary wonder was definitely not her creation. Nope, it was actually whipped up by Chinhi, who was trying to make amends for everything that went down. The moment Ning Bay learned this fun fact, he felt queasy, quicker than you could say bad cooking. He was about to blow chunks all over the couch. Just then, Chinhi stormed in, all fired up, saying that her ex-fiancée had crossed a line when he claimed the porridge was tasty. But as soon as he found out it was her culinary attempt, he straight up spit it out. She barely held back tears, lamenting that all she wanted was to patch things up, but instead, she was met with a total lack of respect. That's when she declared she was done taking this nonsense. Chinhi pivoted and bolted out of there, yelling that she'd never set foot in that house again. Meanwhile, our friend was feeling all dramatic because his porridge was contaminated and he was hanging on by a thread to life. Chinhi had never felt so betrayed before. She kicked herself for trying to reconcile with someone who clearly didn't care. Sprinting to her brother, she had no words to say. All she wanted was to hide in her room and mourn the loss of her engagement. When she finally found her voice, she vowed never to visit Ning Bay again. Her brother was fuming that anyone would dare to treat her that way. As he flung open the mansion's front door, he was practically a volcano ready to erupt, calling out to Ning Bay. He spotted the guy on his knees, but anger clouded his judgment at first. However, once he caught sight of Ning Bay's face, which was turning shades of blue from being so wasted, he quickly realized something was off. Any anger he had vanished and was replaced by disgust. He recoiled and asked what the heck was going on. Mrs. Ching chimed in, saying her son got sick right after eating Chinhi's porridge. Confused and totally lost, the woman didn't know what was happening. Even though her son was writhing in pain, he tried to soothe her panic and insisted he was okay. Chin's brother couldn't believe that this awful porridge was actually made by his sister, who had been slaving over it all morning. Gritting his teeth through the pain, he insisted this poisoning business shouldn't get out, but whoever did it wouldn't dare strike unless they knew all the juicy details. Ning Bay urged Chinhi's brother to act like everything was peachy, shout curse, and pretend he was completely fine. Hearing that the dude was in total shock, he started arguing that the girl wouldn't poison someone she dreamed of being with, but our hero already knew she wasn't the one to blame. He begged her brother to keep this little incident under wraps. After a lengthy chat, the guy's voice faded as he coughed up a putrid purple liquid from his stomach. When he could speak again, he warned the man to wipe that guilty look off his face and not tell Chinhi or anyone else about what was happening to him. The whole scenario in Ning Bay's condition brought tears to her brother's eyes. He promised to do exactly what the guy asked. Lastly, Bay added that if anyone was nosy, he should say he tossed out all the porridge without even trying a bite. Starting to embrace the role Ning Bay had mapped out for him, the man shouted to the heavens that the Su and Ning families were arch enemies now because he would not forgive Chinhi's humiliation. With that, Mr. Su spun on his heel and stomped out of the mansion, slamming the door like it owed him money. After honing in on his aura, our hero realized he'd been hit with some top-tier poison that only a select few could access. Clearly, someone had snuck into the Su family. He knew he had to flush that poison out of his system fast because it was pretty clear that both the Su family and Chinhi were in some serious danger. Meanwhile, Mr. Su's car was zipping down the road faster than a caffeinated jackrabbit. He sensed danger lurking and was eager to get home before anything blew up. Unfortunately, Chinhi couldn't keep her mouth shut and started grilling her brother about what Ning Bay had said. At first, he was at a loss for words, but then he threw it out there that her ex-fiancé had chucked the porridge without even having a spoonful, despite her having seen otherwise. Sensing something was off, she dug even deeper, asking what had really gone down. Her relentless curiosity was making her brother's frustration boil over. She had never seen him so jittery until he mentioned that Ning Bay's life might just hang in the balance based on her words. That's when it hit her that she might only get the truth when she least expected it. At one point, Mr. Su glanced out the window and noticed the folks in the car across the street were giving him the full-on stare down. Just then, both he and Chinhi heard footsteps tapping on the roof of the car. But then, he decided to tell the girl straightforwardly that her ex-fiancé had tossed the porridge without even trying a spoonful despite her having seen differently. The girl sensed that something was off, so she began to pry even more, asking about what was really happening. Her relentless curiosity had her brother in a tizzy. She'd never seen him so eager to spill the beans about something. That could put Ning Bay's life on the line. That's when she realized her only option was to wait for the truth to come out when it was the right time. At some point, Mr. Su looked out the window and noticed the people who were sitting in the car across the street were staring at him. Then he and Chin clearly heard someone's footsteps on the roof of the car. There was no question about it. Someone was definitely tailing them. The worst part, the stalker could eavesdrop on every single word the brother was sharing with Chinhi. Once he stepped out of the Ning family's crib, Bay finally told him to commit that number to memory. This was the exact moment to make that call the dude was blabbering about. After a brief buzz, an unfamiliar voice picked up. Mr. Su quickly whispered that Ning Bay had instructed him to dial this number in case of dire emergencies. Before the mysterious voice could spit out a response, the one who had chosen to chill on the roof jumped into the car. The sudden jolt had the driver yanking the steering wheel to avoid a head-on collision. The vehicle nearly smashed into the sidewalk. Luckily, he managed to hit the brakes just in the nick of time. Once the danger passed, Su spun around to the stranger and demanded to know who he was. The guy didn't respond but was taken aback by how Ning Bay had almost played him like a fiddle. An exasperated Su pressed the stranger, asking if he had a beef with Ba. Why not just confront him directly? But the criminal replied that things weren't that cut and dry. This revelation took Chin by surprise and freaked her out. She listened carefully as the stranger disclosed that even though Ba had been poisoned, there was just a 1-minute window to strike. Listening to this back and forth, the girl was totally confused, unable to fathom what had befallen her fiancé. When he turned his head, the baddie quickly recognized that the bride of the North King was right in front of him. After uttering that line, chills raced down her brother's spine. He hastily proclaimed that the girl had already ended the engagement, but the intruder was starting to get tired of this pointless chatter. so he targeted the poor guy in a sensitive spot, causing him to pass out. With the threat neutralized, the villain then turned to Chinhi and proposed a little trade. If she agreed to go with him without a fuss, her brother could live. With no other options, Chinhi begrudgingly accepted the terms. Meanwhile, the Ning family house was bustling with urgency. Chao Dong was the first one on the scene. A worried Ning Conlin dashed into the yard and questioned why there was a stranger hanging around. There was no time for explanations, so the blonde merely said he was looking for Ba's older brother. Focusing on his instincts, the guy sensed his friend's presence, although it felt very faint. Ignoring the frantic calls from the head of the household, Chao sprinted towards where Ning Bay's energy was coming from. When he burst through the front doors, the guy froze, not prepared to witness the scene unfolding before him. Ning Bay was cloaked in a shroud of light. It was a healing energy trying to keep him alive. The father was totally oblivious that anything was wrong with his son, so his shock mirrored what Chao Dong was experiencing. Madam Ching began recounting how he'd only had a spoonful of the porridge Chinhi had made. Right after, he felt a wave of nausea. The slimy stuff the poor guy had spat out lay splattered on the floor. So Chao Dong pieced it together and figured they were up against some serious insect venom. Clenching his teeth in fury, the blonde realized they hadn't protected the North King properly, and all he could think of was sending curses to anyone who dared to look. In an instant, he felt queasy. The goo that the sick person coughed up was splattered on the floor. So Chao Dong took a good hard look at it and discovered they were dealing with some of the most dangerous insect venom around. Clenching his teeth in fury, the blonde realized they had failed to protect the King of the North, and it made him wish the absolute worst for anyone who dared to look at his lord with anything less than respect.